Chapter 880. Most of the devils were immune to poison. Therefore they would first use some underhanded schemes to earn more chips for themselves. Compared to the high and mighty gods, the ordinary archdevils were still slightly weaker. Of course, the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, was an exception. But if the other archdevils came to the material plane, their strength would at most be similar to that of a fallen saint. In short, if any archdevil dared to come to the material plane, Soren would have the ability to fight them head-on. With Soren's guidance, the church's rogues immediately scattered. Soren also nodded slightly to the high priest next to him, indicating that she should also go and see the situation. Those who had the ability to cast a magic circle to pollute the earth were basically senior devils, which meant that their strength was above the legendary level. They were at least elite bone devils, and there was even the possibility of higher-level devils appearing. To deal with such an enemy, the high priest was still needed. The rogues soon found something. Because they found some dead animals. These animals were poisoned to death and some of their bodies had begun to rot. Over here. A priest's exclamation came from somewhere, followed by the sound of a battle. The others heard the sound and rushed over, and Soren also frowned slightly and flew over. The devils used such a large-scale killing method. Their purpose was not only to deal with mortals and harvest souls. Soren always felt that they were targeting the gods. Because once mortals were poisoned, they had to rely on the priest's divine spells to dispel and heal. Currently, during the Avatar crisis, the gods could only give a limited amount of divine spells to the priests. In the case of limited divine spells, it was more difficult to suppress the spread of this disaster. And if it couldn't be controlled, the number of mortals dying would increase, and the channels for the gods to obtain faith would become less and less. In the end, it would become an endless cycle. If a large number of mortal believers died, then the gods would obtain less faith, and the situation would become more and more unfavorable for them. The devils and the evil gods were not on the same side. They only obeyed the orders of the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, and only remained in awe of the other evil gods. The devils' actions this time must have something to do with the Lord of Hell. By the time Soren arrived, the battle had already ended. An intermediate chain devil, an intermediate bone devil, and a group of lesser devils had all been killed by the priests. In front of them was a huge altar that was shrouded in a foul and poisonous aura. This was the aura of the Bator Inferno. When the Bator Inferno was first created, it was filled with poison, fire, and torture. It was a plane that was first created to punish evil. The altar was polluting the land nearby, and if this continued, the water source would also start to affect more places. Destroy this place. Soren ordered with a frown. Hearing his order, the other rogues and priests immediately began to work, and in a short while the altar was destroyed. At the same time, following the destruction of the altar, the corrosive energy gradually weakened. Now all that was left was to purify the ground. Who dares to destroy the Lord's plan? Just as the altar was about to be completely destroyed, a roar filled with pressure rang out. Then a raging fire ignited under the altar, and a 3-meter-tall greater devil appeared in the fire. This devil held a heavy greatsword in his hand, and his broad bat wings made him look like a devil. Many of his features were very similar to that of a greater devil, but the aura he emitted was that of a greater devil. Greater teleportation. To be able to teleport to a material plane so easily, his strength must be at least at the legendary level. Without a doubt. This was a devil on the same level as the Baylor, one of the Bator Infernos, Abyss Fiend. The Abyss Fiend was one of the top fighting forces in Barthas. It looked very similar to the Baylor, but it had the characteristics of a devil, and its strength was slightly weaker than the Baylor. Of course, this was in the case of a one-on-one battle. If it was any other battle, then the Abyss Fiend would have a much higher chance of winning. The Abyss Fiend's strength was at least 35 points, and their challenge level was at least 21. If a normal person were to encounter them, then without a legendary party, they wouldn't have much of a chance of winning. This was because devils were more cunning than demons. The Abyss Fiend was proficient in all kinds of teleportation techniques, and could cast a blasphemous whisper with a spell power of 25 or above. In theory, an Abyss Fiend had the ability to destroy a small city on its own. The pressure of a legendary demon enveloped everything around it. The Pit Fiend came out of the fire aggressively and glanced at the priests and rogues in front of it with contempt. However, when its gaze fell on Sauron and the high priest who were standing at the back, the Pit Fiend's eyes were filled with disdain. The Abyss Fiend, who had just appeared in an incomparably cool manner, immediately activated a greater teleportation spell without saying anything. It didn't even want to say goodbye and it was ready to flee. Trying to run after showing off? No way. Soren looked at the abyss fiend in front of him expressionlessly as he cast a greater teleportation spell. However, when the teleportation spell was about to be completed, the abyss fiend's face showed a look of relief. Soren silently waved his hand. Change space, power of divinity. The teleportation spell that was about to be completed disappeared instantly, and the abyss fiend's face froze at that moment. Then he turned around stiffly and without saying a word, his huge body directly knelt in front of Soren, and said with a trembling voice, "Great Shadow Lord, Protector of the Half-Elves, Ruler of Mordor, Supreme Soren, lowly Floss didn't mean to offend your majesty. It's just." The abyss fiend, who called himself Floss, hesitated for a moment. After weighing whether his life or the mission was more important, he directly said, "Lowly Floss is just loyally carrying out the orders from the top of hell. I don't have any intention to offend the great Soren." This guy knelt down quite straightforwardly. Soren's expression finally changed a little, and the others present were a little stunned. It seemed that they couldn't react in time. At first, he appeared in an incomparably cool manner, but after seeing Soren, he immediately turned 360 degrees and knelt on the spot. The abyss fiend's performance was too dramatic. Everyone present didn't know whether to laugh or cry after they reacted. However, they couldn't help but praise this guy in their hearts for being able to adapt to the circumstances. Obviously, he had done his homework before taking action. Otherwise, he wouldn't have recognized Soren at a glance. And he knelt down so decisively. P.S. From today onwards, the public account will update some of the greater gods' information. You can follow it and have a look. Chapter 881. In the dream, Fudo had become an incomparably awesome exorcist. Furthermore, he had gone to England to deal with all kinds of vampires and female canines. The whole process was extremely satisfying. He had been pretending to be cool the whole time. It had been a long time since I had such a good dream. After waking up, I had a look of longing for more. Just as the dream was about to end after a big battle with a group of vampires, a white-bearded priest told me, "Fudo, you have worked hard. You should have a good rest." When I thought about it, it really made sense. In the dream, Fudo had fought with many vampires for 300 rounds. He was indeed exhausted. Therefore, it was reasonable for me to rest today. As a result, it just so happened that every month, there were more than 30 days that I did not want to write. Therefore, it was reasonable for me to ask for leave today. Today, not only did I have to ask for leave, Fudo also asked for monthly votes. By the way, I gave myself a thumbs up for being so shameless. Chapter 882. Floss was in a bad mood. As a devil, even if he was a senior devil, he had to learn to obey the orders of his superiors. So when he received the mission to spread the plague near the Windspear Hills, Floss felt terrible. Because this mission was planned by the higher-ups of the Bator Inferno, and the purpose was to weaken the power of the material plane. It would be best if the priests of the churches of the gods were exhausted. The mission location was assigned by the higher-ups. Floss felt that he must have not handed in enough souls during this time, so he was sent to a place like the Windspear Hills by his superiors. This place was not terrible. But the terrible thing was the god in charge of this place. The god of shadows, Soren. This was a famous god killer in the multiverse. First, he killed the god of the hunt, Malor, and then he killed the god of shadows. The name of this existence had long been spread throughout the Bator Inferno, so how could Floss not know of his existence? So when he knew that the mission location was within the range of this lord's religion, Floss was a little depressed. But the rules of the Bator Inferno meant that there were some missions that could not be avoided. So after thinking for a long time, Floss decided to avoid other places in the Windspear Hills and just deal with it in a random corner. He would kill some mortals and collect souls and then fool his superiors in hell. But Floss never thought that Soren would notice such a small action and catch him on the spot. As a high and mighty god, Soren was a little different from the other gods. That was, the other gods had existed for a long time, and they had long been indifferent to the life and death of mortals. It was more like a number to them. But Soren was different. After all, he had not been a god for a long time, and the education he received had determined that he cared more about the life and death of mortals than the other gods. If other gods knew that all the mortals in a village were dead, they would at most send their internal church to check it out. This was the same even for the gods of the good alignment. Even the god of light, who represented the lawful good, would not make a big fuss over the deaths of all the mortals in the village. However, this was completely different for Soren. After learning that all the mortals in the village had died, he decided to come over personally. That was the tragedy of Floss. He believed that a god like Soren wouldn't care about the lives of hundreds of mortals, let alone solve these problems himself. But reality gave him a merciless blow. Not only did Soren attach great importance to this matter, he even personally came to check it out. Then without a doubt Floss knelt on the spot. Under such circumstances what else could he do but kneel on the spot? He was facing a mid-level god, and a notorious god slayer. His opponent used the power of divinity to seal his escape spell, and there was also a high priest standing beside him. Floss didn't have the slightest chance of winning, and if he hesitated he would be killed by Soren on the spot. Although Soren was a god of the evil alignment, he didn't care about the mortals of the evil alignment. However, he could not remain indifferent to the deaths of hundreds of innocent civilians in the area of his faith. If the Abyss Fiend did not kneel on the spot, perhaps he would consider killing him directly. But since the Abyss Fiend was so sensible, he had other uses for Soren. Although the Abyss Fiend was a demon of the Bator Inferno, his genes came from the Abyss. The Tana-Re demons and the Barthas demons, although these two races were at odds with each other, their origin was the same, and that was the Abyss Worm. The Abyss Worm was one of the most important currencies in the lower planes. Demons loved to herd, and sell the Abyss Worms. Whether it was the demons of the Bator Inferno or the Abyss, they could use the Abyss Worm to evolve into low-rank demons and low-rank demons. The Abyss Fiend was born from the genes of the Baler demons. Note, it's a Baler, not a Flame Baler. Tell me your true name. Soren's figure disappeared from where he was and appeared in front of the Abyss Fiend. Swear the sticks and tell me everything you know. Then I'll spare your life. A high-ranked Abyss Fiend had many uses, because they were usually the direct subordinates of the archdevils of the Bator Inferno. Such high-grade demons generally had a certain degree of freedom. What Soren wanted to do was to deprive them of their freedom and directly turn them into his own slaves. All evil gods were good at this, because no matter if they were in the Bator Inferno or the Abyss, they all liked to recruit high-ranked demons and devils as their subordinates. In the Dreadlord's divine kingdom, there were many demons and devils as his servants. In the face of Soren, a mid-level divine power, Floss had no choice. So he simply told Soren his real name, and then let Soren leave the mark of the evil god on his soul. He was done for. Once the mark of the evil god was planted, it was very difficult to remove it. Unless it was the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, other archdevils would not be able to remove it. This was because he was a mid-ranked evil god. Just like how Soren couldn't erase the soul imprint left by the succubus queen on the fallen witch Kalina, this kind of power that involved the soul was the most difficult to remove. Even the gods sometimes couldn't do anything about it. You stay here and purify this land. After Soren completed the mark, he turned to the high priest and said, "Tell the church's inquisition to pay attention to the movements of the devils. Don't let the plague spread to the Windspear Hills." After that, Soren turned to the Abyss Fiend Floss and said, "Come with me to the city of Moder. I have an important task for you. As long as you can do it well, I won't be stingy with the rewards. I can even give you a part of the power of divinity. I will let you gain the power and status you deserve in my divine kingdom. But if you dare to play tricks on me, I don't suggest that I extract your soul and study it." At this point, Soren's voice became cold. It was easy to deal with the devils. The creatures of the lawful evil alignment had their own rules of conduct. When dealing with the devils, they always had to remember one thing, and that was to coerce them. Power and power were what they desired. The Bator Inferno had a strict hierarchy. It was more difficult for the devils to be promoted than the devils. Soren had to promise them enough benefits and tell them the consequences of going against him. The devils were very smart. Generally, very smart people would know what to do in this situation. P.S. First update. Today's update. Chapter 883. Controlling demons was easier than controlling demons. Because the creatures of the lawful alignment were accustomed to obeying orders. Compared to the chaotic nature of demons, after controlling a demon, you didn't have to worry about it being like a demon. But if you controlled a demon, then you must always be aware that the demon would never be loyal to you. They were always thinking about how to betray you. It was just that before they had the confidence, these devils would work obediently. Demons believed in order and rules, but not because the latter could promote the progress of the whole society, but because they believed that they could seek their own interests from these rules. Every demon was eager to be promoted to a higher level so that they could change the rules at will to meet their goals. The ideal of the demons was to go from obeying the rules to making their own rules. In many levels of the Bator Inferno, Many demons would make various rules for other demons to pursue their own interests. As a high and mighty god, especially a god with mid-level divine power, he was a god. Soren didn't need to worry about the betrayal of a high-grade demon. He was confident enough to control the other party because gods controlled demons differently from mortals. Gods controlled demons directly from the soul, while mortals mostly relied on spells and real names. In this way, demons could betray their masters at any time and plot to kill them. Mordor City afternoon. Shortly after Soren returned, Gloria came to the study. "I heard that you brought back a high-grade demon?" Gloria came in and looked around. Then she flipped her long hair and said, "Why is it gone? Did you let it go?" Soren nodded and looked at her. "What's wrong?" "I have something to send it to deal with, so it has returned to the Bator Inferno." "It's nothing." Gloria smiled and said softly, "It's just that some research needs the blood of high-grade demons, but since it has been released, I'll use something else instead. By the way." Speaking of this, Gloria's expression became serious and she said seriously, "Recently, someone in the Council Hall of Mordor has found infected people in the port of Mordor. At present they have all been quarantined. I think according to the current situation on the mainland, we should also control the foreign population." The epidemic spread faster than expected. Although the churches of the gods reacted quickly, some places that lacked priests quickly became a paradise for zombies. Currently, the paladins were clearing out the undead and searching for traces of the devils. Even the Holy Avenger had asked Soren for a batch of safe supplies to help the victims. Many cities and towns on the continent had been quarantined. The churches of the gods were cleaning up the devil's minions in batches, and at the same time, they were carefully guarding the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. "Yes. Then let's restrict the number of outsiders for now." Soren thought about it and felt that it made sense, so he said, "Issue a ban in the city of Mordor. Currently, outsiders are not allowed to enter. Port Mordor has added an inspection mechanism. I will send the church's priests to pay attention. The third wave is coming soon. Now that the blood war in the bottomless abyss is about to come to an end, it's very likely that the devil's main army in the blood war will attack the material plane and plunder souls. Blood War Legion." Just thinking about this name was enough to make many mortals in the material plane feel fear. Because of the Avatar crisis, the current blood war in the bottomless abyss was about to stop, and the intensity was not even 1/10 of the original. In this way, the devil's main army in the blood war had free time. This was also one of the biggest challenges facing the material plane in the Avatar crisis. The devil's main army that had been honed in the blood war for thousands of years was almost invincible in the material plane. Even the army of Mordor was vulnerable in front of them. Perhaps the only thing that could fight against them in the material plane was the Golem army during the Arcane Empire. The third wave of impact was just a tentative attack by the Blood War Legion. Only during the last wave of the Avatar crisis would Asmodeus, the Lord of Hell, send out the elites of the Blood War Legion, as well as the top elite demon legion that rose to become senior demons in the Blood War and gradually disappeared. It was said that they were sent to the deepest part of hell. Note: as mentioned before, the excellent senior devils who rose in the Blood War would eventually be sent to the deepest part of the Bator Inferno to become Asmodeus' trump card. No one knows what he will do with these top Blood War devils' main army. Legend has it that he is going to use this group of elites to counterattack Mountain Paradise. History had entered a period of choice. Although it was only the third wave of impact, Soren had already felt that the final outbreak of the Avatar crisis was gradually coming. There was not much time left for him. In his previous life, the material plane could survive because there were 3 million paladins supporting the backbone of the world. These paladins fought on the front line and faced the devil's main army that survived the Blood War. But now the adventurers were long gone. Even now, Soren had no confidence that he could change the fate of the final battle. At most, he could barely rely on his own ability to help Mordor survive the Avatar crisis. The Blood War Legion was difficult to defeat. Unless someone could restart the Blood War in the Abyss, the material plane must face the top devil's main army of Asmodeus. The Blood War in the Abyss. This might be the last way for Soren to change the Avatar crisis so that the material plane would not be destroyed. In fact, he had been aware of this for a long time. Only by restarting the Blood War in the Abyss could he delay the devil's main army of Asmodeus during the Avatar crisis, give the material plane time to breathe, and then drag the devils into the endless war with the devils again. Soren's plot in the Abyss was not small. At first, it was just to protect himself, then it was for Vivian, but everything was connected. If possible, Soren did not mind saving the world even if he was a god of the evil camp. But If Soren finally decided to do so, then he must face the challenge of Asmodeus, the Lord of Hell. In the face of such a terrible enemy, Soren must be above the level of great divine power. The future was full of endless variables. Soren, as a far-sighted person, must consider things in the long run. If a person does not consider the long run, there will be immediate worries. What he could do now was to accumulate his strength step by step, wait for the third wave of the Avatar crisis to come, and then accumulate strength to deal with the fourth wave of the Avatar crisis. As for whether he could save the material plane and meet the final battle of the Avatar crisis, for now, the only way Soren could think of was to restart the Blood War in the Abyss. Without 3 million paladins to support the world, only the Blood War in the Abyss could save the world. P.S. Second update. This book is beginning to enter the middle and late stages. After writing for such a long time, Futu's spirit would sometimes be very tired. I hope everyone can understand. Chapter 884. It was an insidious realm of darkness and power. It was a hidden place that hated the light. It was a remote and unknown desolate land. The Shadow Realm. The Shadow Plane was a dark plane that was connected to and coexisted with the prime material plane. The way it overlapped with the main material realm was similar to that of the Ether Realm. Therefore, plane travelers could quickly jump long distances through the Shadow Realm. The Shadow Realm was also connected to other realms. You could use the Shadow Realm as a springboard to visit other realms of existence through spells. The Shadow Realm was filled with the contrast of black and white. The color had been infected by the surrounding environment, and it was as dark as the universe. On the other hand, the Shadow Realm was very similar to the main material realm, but not exactly the same. Just like the sky above, there was always a dark dome where the sun, moon, and stars could not be seen. The same landmarks as the main material realm could be seen in the Shadow Realm, but they were distorted and still the most vague reflection of the main material realm. Although it was dark, there were still many animals, plants, and humanoid creatures that called the Shadow Realm their home. Generally, the geography of the Shadow Realm was similar to the place where travelers entered the Shadow Realm from in the main material realm. If a sorcerer entered the Shadow Realm from a forest, she would first see a shadow forest. If she entered from underwater, she would appear in the sea of shadows that flowed like the ocean in the main material realm. So her water-breathing technique was still effective. Although the terrain of the Shadow Plane was somewhat similar to that of the main material plane, there would still be some changes in the environment when she left the place she entered. Soren stood on a vast sea of shadows. Because Mordor was located in the Outer Islands, the Shadow Realm was surrounded by the sea except for the fixed teleportation within the range of the Arcane Tower. In short, the place where the Arcane Tower was found was also an isolated island in the Shadow Realm. This was not the first time Soren explored the Shadow Realm, but today he came to the Shadow Realm for a different purpose. This time, Soren entered the Shadow Realm for a very important thing. That would mean that his divine kingdom had fallen. As a god of the evil alignment, after Soren inherited the half-elf priesthood, his kingdom was constantly falling. Under normal circumstances, Soren's kingdom should have fallen directly to the lower realm. However, since he killed the Shadow Lord and inherited the priesthood of the Shadow Lord, his kingdom began to move towards the Shadow Realm. This was the characteristic of the priesthood. The whole process of falling did not last long. Today, Soren had a strong feeling and noticed that the god's kingdom had reached the Shadow Plane. Yes. Soren flew in the boundless Shadow Sea for a long time, but as the distance narrowed little by little, a strong feeling became stronger and stronger. At the same time, the gravity of the Shadow Lord's kingdom began to increase. The characteristics of the Shadow Plane are normal gravity and normal time. The sudden increase in gravity here could only be due to some external force causing the spacetime distortion. My divine kingdom is nearby. There were many similarities between the Shadow Plane and the material plane. The gravity here was not as terrible as the Earth elemental plane. The biggest difference was that shadow energy could be increased by 30% in this plane, while flames and light would be weakened by about 30%. This characteristic was very common, just like how fire spells in the scorching hell could be increased by 50%. Soren gently landed on the surface of the sea. He closed his eyes and sensed everything. Suddenly, a ray of divine light burst out from his eyes. He suddenly opened his eyes and said, "Found it." Greater teleportation. The next moment, Soren's figure appeared tens of kilometers away. In front of him was a stretch of deep darkness. The space around him seemed to have overlapped with each other, and there were faint traces of spatial rifts. It looked like the god of the hunt, Maelor's kingdom, had fallen. However, Soren was different from Maelor. As a true god, he did not fall, so his kingdom was not destroyed in the process of falling. It was only slightly damaged. He tried to get closer to his kingdom. But suddenly, a huge repulsive force appeared and directly bounced Soren's figure out. A stream of blood spurted out. Soren covered his chest and frowned as he looked forward. After he got close to his kingdom, he triggered a very chaotic and violent force that directly knocked Soren out. He had no ability to resist at all. It was as if the law of the kingdom was repelling him. The Avatar crisis. The terrible chaotic storm that broke out in the time of troubles was still there. All the gods could not enter their kingdoms. So even if Soren's kingdom was in front of him, he could not step in. It seems that I can only go back when the Avatar crisis is over. Soren shook his head and sighed. He cast a healing divine spell on himself. The power of the law had a repelling effect on the body of the gods. At present, even the Lord of Light had no way to enter his divine kingdom, let alone him. However, Soren came to the Shadow Realm this time not to hide in his kingdom, but to do something more important. That was to integrate his kingdom into the Shadow Realm. Although it was something that Soren must do in the future, the Shadow Realm was also an important springboard that could almost connect to most of the realms in the multiverse. The Shadow Realm had a certain special characteristic. It was the characteristics mentioned above. Everything here was covered with a layer of shadow energy. After Soren's god's kingdom fell into the shadow plane, it formed a distortion of space and time, causing the nearby gravity to increase. Because the law inside the god's kingdom was still repelling the shadow plane, the two sides had not completely merged together. Now what Soren had to do was to make the characteristics of his kingdom conform to the characteristics of the shadow realm mentioned above, and remove the repelling nature of the law through the transformation of divine power. Divine form. Soren's figure rose into the air, and his whole person turned into a human figure made of golden light. At this moment he was like a high and mighty god, looking down on the shadow plane like a golden giant. Countless shadow creatures sensed his presence and couldn't help but look in his direction. He was the master of the shadow realm. At this moment, what Soren had to do was to assimilate his kingdom with the shadow realm. At the very least, he had to integrate the characteristics of the shadow realm. Otherwise, the power of the law would be repelled step by step, and eventually the kingdom would be damaged. Change reality. Shard of divinity. The surrounding space gradually distorted, and traces of cracks in the realm were repaired by Soren's divine power. At the same time, with the power of the divinity of shadow, the energy from the shadow realm began to gather around him. Change space. Shard of divinity. Countless shadow energy gathered around Soren like a torrent, and then he injected it into the god's kingdom. Although Soren could not perceive and see everything in the god's kingdom, he knew that everything inside the god's kingdom was slowly changing. A little shadow emerged. The shadow energy from the shadow realm was assimilating the interior of his kingdom. Among the original elements of earth, water, wind, and fire, there was an element pool from the shadow. To stabilize his kingdom in the shadow realm, Soren had to completely transform his kingdom. Normal gravity. Normal time. Infinite space. Although he could not enter his kingdom, Soren still maintained a certain level of control. After all, it was his kingdom. While the shadow realm was merging with his kingdom, Soren was also setting the most basic structure of his kingdom. The shadow energy began to dominate. However, the characteristics of the god realm still maintained the characteristics of normal gravity, normal time, and infinite space. That was to say, the space of the god realm still maintained the infinite possibility of growth. His divine power began to be consumed rapidly. The power that Soren had accumulated during this time was quickly squandered away. However, as the god realm merged with a large amount of shadow energy, the nearby cracks in the realm were disappearing little by little. At the same time, the change in gravity caused by the distortion of time and space gradually disappeared. Soren's half-elf kingdom was merging into the shadow realm. Realm shift. Although it had merged into the shadow realm, Soren had to do more than that. He began to move his kingdom, and then approached the location where the Shadow Lord was originally located. This would take a while. Soren only set a coordinate and let the two kingdoms gradually get close to each other. When the two sides were close to a certain distance, what Soren had to do was to merge the two kingdoms together. It was not difficult to move the kingdom, but it was moving up and down. Because of the characteristics of the realm, it was easier to move up and down, but moving the kingdom horizontally required a lot of power. Soren's divine power could not withstand such consumption. He could only rely on the characteristics of the realm to move slowly. There was still some time before the Avatar crisis was over. Even if he wanted to merge the two kingdoms, he would have to wait for a while. It's finally done. When the half-elf kingdom merged into the Shadow Realm and began to move, Soren finally breathed a sigh of relief. The fall of the God Realm was not a simple matter. He had been calculating the time and waiting for the God Realm to reach the Shadow Realm. Because if he left it alone, the God Realm might collapse directly. Fortunately, the Shadow Realm was very close to the material plane, and Soren could deal with it easily. The characteristics of the realm here were very good. To some extent, except for the rich shadow energy, the characteristics of the Shadow Realm were very similar to the material plane. This also facilitated Soren's transformation of the interior of the God Realm. According to the degree of impact caused by the fall, Soren felt that although the interior of his God Realm had some losses, it should not be completely torn apart like the God Realm of Malor, the god of the hunt. As long as the God Realm did not collapse, even if it was only a change in the landscape, it was within the scope of Soren's tolerance. Next, what he had to do was to wait. When the half-elf kingdom gradually approached the Shadow Realm, Soren could try to use the power of divinity to merge the two kingdoms together. P.S. I was maliciously targeted and the advertising lady was banned again. Is it easy for an author to earn money to support his family? Now there are so many readers who read pirated books, and Futu did not say anything, nor did he do anything to prevent piracy. He just silently wrote his own book and found a way. It was not easy to have other income subsidies, but there were always people who targeted him and destroyed him. I really don't know what to say. Chapter 885. The sixth layer of the Bator Inferno. This plain was an endless rocky slope. Waterfalls formed by rocks were very common here. They would crush anything in their path. The sky was boiling like scales. The devils of this layer were protected by red copper fortresses, which were designed to divert and deflect the frequent rock flows. However, nothing could stop the worst of the landslides, so the characteristics of this plain were slowly changing. Unless Asmodeus took action, it would take thousands of years. Abyssal Fiend Floss's figure appeared in this layer. There were many terrible environments in the Bator Inferno, but Floss had long since gotten used to them. As a greater devil, Abyssal Fiends, or Pit Fiends, could adapt to most environments. Floss had been a Pit Fiend for quite some time now, and had been to most of the layers of the Bator Inferno. However, his activities were mainly in the first and second layers of the Bator Inferno. These two layers had more opportunities, while the lower layers of the Bator Inferno lacked enough opportunities to advance. He had come here to complete an important task given to him by Soren. Although he was unwilling to deal with the person he was about to meet, it was no longer up to him to decide. The original lord of the sixth layer of the Bator Inferno was an old hag. The hag countess wasn't a greater devil, but an extremely powerful night hag from the underworld. The former devil lord Moloch had once ruled this layer, but he was later overthrown. During a great rebellion that swept through the 9 hells, he openly defied the lord of hell, Asmodeus. Most authorities agreed that this hag, one of Moloch's most trusted advisors, was the one who suggested Moloch's rebellion. Of course, the rebellion failed, and the hag was placed in Moloch's position. However, it was difficult for a hag that wasn't of the lawful evil faction to hold a high position in the Bator Inferno for long. Unsurprisingly, the hag countess eventually met her end. The new lord of the sixth layer of the Bator Inferno was Queen Umaglasia. She was the daughter of the lord of hell, Asmodeus. The princess of hell had already become a greater devil. Her mother had died in the last rebellion, and she hated the devil lord of the fifth layer, Levistus. He'd been sealed in ice by Asmodeus for thousands of years. Before becoming the overlord of the sixth hell, Queen Umaglasia had traveled the prime material plane and gained a few followers. Most of Glasia's followers were inexperienced, young, and naive humans. Glasia recruited youths brimming with vitality and made them willingly accept certain taboo experiments. The Principality of Rossard must be mentioned here. The Queen Uma's shadow had always been behind the rapid rise of Soren's rival, the Duke of Red Dragon. A warlock's bloodline required certain taboo conditions to maintain. Soren had enough reason to suspect that it was the Queen Umaglasia's help that allowed the Duke of Red Dragon's wife to possess her current strength. Moreover, the Queen Uma had been searching for humans in the prime material plane for a long time to conduct experiments. The Duke of Red Dragon was likely to be one of the successful experiments. In this plane ruled by the daughter of the Lord of Bator, Asmodeus, the Pit Fiend Floss kept a low profile. After advancing for half a day, he arrived in the vicinity of a special red fortress in the sixth plane. This was a fortress with red copper on the outside. As a greater devil, Floss easily passed through the guards and obtained the right to meet the master of the fortress, the soul stealer Nigris. Floss passed through a passage filled with the smell of metal. The walls around him were filled with corpses that had been turned into specimens. There were devils, demons, and even demons. Most of the powerful creatures in the lower planes had their corpses left behind as specimens in this passage. All of this represented the strength of the master of this fortress, and all the guests who came here for the first time felt a trace of reverence. "I heard you want to discuss a big deal with me?" When Floss entered a vast dark red hall, a devil sitting on a chair made from the skin of a hellhound turned around. He looked a little like a gray-skinned human, but was different from the other devils. This was a greater devil that had constructed his own form and appearance. He looked like a human with a single horn, gray skin, and scarlet pupils. "Yes." Floss tried his best to keep his voice calm. The greater devil in front of him was the legendary soul stealer, Nigris of the Bator Inferno. Just like there were many unknown top legendary figures in the gray area of the material plane, there were also some devils in the Bator Inferno who were very powerful, but their reputation was far less than the other archdevils and the devil generals among the devils. However, as long as one came into contact with the higher-ups in the lower planes, they would know that there was a group of very special existences in the lower planes. That was the Soul Stealer. The Soul Stealer was a title, and it was a taboo title in the lower planes. If one was not a greater devil, a demon, or a demon, one would not know about the existence of these monsters. They were thieves and robbers. They were also the most dangerous group of people in the lower planes. Because the origin of the title Soul Stealer came from this group of people who often sneaked into the underworld or places close to the underworld, and then stole high-quality souls from the servants of death from other planes. This was a well-known point. On the 6th floor of the Bator Inferno, the fortress where Queen Yuma Glacia was located was recognized as the place where the most souls were stored in the Bator Inferno. Even long before the Hag Countess was on the throne, that fortress was the place where the most souls were stored in the Bator Inferno. The reason was simple. That was because there was a special organization on the 6th floor of the Bator Inferno, and that was the Soul Stealer, which was made up of the most daring high-grade demons and devils. Nigris was the current leader of the Soul Stealers on the 6th floor. These Soul Stealers rarely participated in the fights between the Archdukes. They were like a group of special arms dealers. If the Archdukes lost many of their subordinates and needed a batch of high-quality souls to replenish their servants, then they would trade with the Archdukes. They would sell the souls of professionals stolen from the servants of death at a high price from the underworld, the spirit realm, the Yellow Wilderness, and other places to them. Most of the Soul Stealers were very powerful, and almost all of the existences who could get the title of Soul Stealer were at least high-grade legends. Floss was a little nervous, but he still took a deep breath and said, "My master needs a large number of high-quality soul crystals." "I thought about it. In the Bator Inferno, I'm afraid that only you have them." Hearing Floss' words, Nigris smiled and said calmly, "The most valuable thing in the lower planes is souls." "Then, how many souls does your master want? What will he use as a trade?" Souls were the currency of the lower planes. And the souls of professionals were the best part of the currency. The Soul Stealers were not interested in the souls of ordinary people. They only stole the souls of professionals and high-grade creatures from the hands of the servants of death. Nigris did not ask who the master behind Floss was. This was the rule of the lower planes. The Soul Stealers would never ask who bought the souls from them. They only cared about whether the other party could take out something that they were interested in as a reward. Divine artifact. The Abyss Purgatory demon, Florence, slowly uttered the two words. Then he saw the pupils of the Soul Stealer, Nigris, in front of him suddenly shrink. The weight of the two words was heavier than he imagined. And as the leader of the Soul Stealers, he must have thought of the identity of the existence who could take out the divine artifact. For a moment, Nigris the Soul Stealer hesitated, but he quickly nodded and said, "If that's the case, then there's no problem with the trade. We still need to see the actual goods for the specific number and equivalent souls to be traded. Also, please convey our goodwill to your master." Chapter 886. After discussing some matters, the pit fiend Floss left the castle. Not long after he left, Nigris sent a greater devil to secretly deliver a message to the largest palace in the 6th level of the Bator Inferno. About 10 minutes later, a teleportation portal appeared. The radiance of an advanced teleportation spell appeared, and 3 graceful figures, 1 big and 2 small, appeared in the Soul Stealer's hall. Lady Glacia. Although Nigris was the leader of the Soul Stealers, he was no different from an ordinary lesser devil in front of the ruler of the 6th level of the Bator Inferno, Queen of Umaglasia. The Soul Stealers were a very loose organization. Although there were many elites within, devils, demons and devils were a mix of races. Most of the Soul Stealers were under the protection of the lords of the lower planes. Nigris was under the protection of the Queen of Umaglasia, but he wasn't her servant. The two were closer to a cooperative relationship. The large amount of souls stored in Glasia's castle came from the offerings of the Soul Stealers. Queen of Umaglasia was a beautiful devil with bronze skin. She had a pair of wings that symbolized her status as a greater lustful devil, a small and deadly swallowtail and a sharp horn. In terms of appearance, she was probably one of the most beautiful female creatures in the Bator Inferno, perhaps even in the multiverse. There were many adjectives to describe her appearance that didn't need to be repeated. She was absolutely exquisite and full of temptation. Although her charm couldn't compare to the succubus queen Mechanut, she was more beautiful than the succubus queen. She had inherited the power of the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. She wasn't that old among the devil lords, but she had already advanced to become a greater devil. Behind Glasia were two small and exquisite lustful demons. Nigris didn't dare to look at the lustful queen in front of him because he knew how prideful she was and how cruel she was to male demons. In all of Bator, there were only a handful of males who could compare to her in terms of status and strength. As the daughter of the Lord of Bator, Glasia didn't place any males in her eyes apart from her own father. Naturally, she treated any male devils who had designs on her as nothing more than playthings to entertain themselves with. Of course, this wasn't the sex and love of the mortal world. Glasia wouldn't allow a male creature so much lower than her to touch her. What she liked was a form of entertainment that was even more cruel, merciless, and bloody. Speak. Glasia's voice carried a trace of arrogance as she faced the leader of the Soul Stealers. You called me over in such a hurry. There must be something important. Queen Yuma narrowed her eyes. One thing was for sure. If what he said next didn't satisfy her, Nigris knew that he would have a hard time in the future. Yes. He hurriedly nodded and said in a deep voice, a greater devil came to make a deal with me today. He actually asked for 6,000 mid-grade soul crystals right off the bat. Next, Nigris told Queen Yuma about the details of his conversation with Floss. As the overlord of the 6th layer of the Bator Inferno, she was involved in most of the major transactions of the Soul Stealers. It was highly likely that a Grand Duke or Lesser Devil Overlord was preparing to expand their army, and there might be information that Glasia needed. In the lower planes, many Devil Overlords liked to buy wild abyssal worms from night witches and ghost nannies, and then choose the ones with potential to become mid-grade devils. However, most of the elite troops of the Archdevil Lords were creatures that had been personally created using their souls. Devils born this way had great potential and were very loyal to their creators. In other words, the Devil Lords had already left a mark of enslavement on these souls when they transformed them into devils. 6,000 middle grade and above souls? That's enough to form an elite army. After hearing Nigris' words, Queen Umaglasia couldn't help but sink into deep thought. He's actually using a divine weapon to make a deal. Could it be that there's an evil god standing behind him? An evil god. Many evil gods had attached their divine kingdoms to the Bator Inferno, and many of them were close to the Bator Inferno. That was why the greater devils had a lot of dealings with them. Glasia's expression grew solemn as this matter involved an evil god. Can you guess who it is? She turned to look at the Soul Stealer in front of her. There are only so many evil gods near the Bator Inferno. Do you know who's behind him? The majority of evil gods were in the lower planes. However, dealing with the Soul Stealer didn't necessarily require an evil god whose divine kingdom was in the Bator Inferno. Evil gods from other places like the Grey Wastes, the Azura Field, the Scorching Inferno, and so on could also secretly find a representative to buy souls from the Bator Inferno. I don't know. Nigris shook his head. However, I can confirm that the evil god behind the pit fiend isn't simple. I actually sensed a monitoring imprint on him. It's very likely that he's an evil god with lesser divine force or higher. Hearing the Soul Stealer's words, Glasia furrowed her brows and pondered for a moment. Let's do the deal as per normal. Once the divine weapon is delivered, bring it to me immediately. Most divine artifacts had their own requirements. Mortals wouldn't be able to use them if they didn't meet the requirements. However, for greater devils with a trace of divinity and even more powerful devil overlords, divine weapons were shockingly valuable. Sometimes divine weapons didn't need to be used. Devils could always think of various ways to corrupt and transform a divine weapon, whether it was to corrupt it or find a way to extract the divine force within it. This was something that all devils were tempted by. Your subordinate understands? Nigris hurriedly nodded. Glacia's face revealed a trace of satisfaction when she heard this. Serve me well. If you can prove yourself, I'll recommend you to my father. Queen Yuma's father was naturally the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. Nigris' expression immediately revealed a trace of excitement when he heard this. Motor City. Study. Today was a good day. Although the outer islands were becoming more and more stormy as summer approached, and even Motor City would experience heavy downpours from time to time. However, Soren had received a piece of good news today. The devil's servant he'd sent out had contacted the Soul Stealer in the Bator Inferno. If the transaction was successful, Soren would be able to obtain a large number of mid-level and above soul crystals from the Soul Stealer, and these soul crystals could all be used to make steel golems. With the further development of Motor City, ordinary golems could no longer meet Soren's requirements. Moreover, creating higher-grade steel golems required even better soul crystals. This was something that could only be satisfied in the lower planes. From golems to steel golems, the combat power would soar in a straight line. An army composed entirely of steel golems? Let alone an army from a material plane, even an elite demon army from the abyss would be able to fight to their heart's content. At present, Soren had already dealt with the soul crystals. What he had to do next was to find a way to obtain a large amount of steel to meet the consumption of the golem factory at full power. Of course, that was a little difficult to do. Because with the current level of civilization in the material plane, it was impossible to meet the steel output required by Soren. Soren still had no clue about the steel-making technology during the Arcane Empire. The magic steel forging process was still under research. Therefore, the only thing Soren could do now was to increase the manpower investment and mobilize the Grey Dwarves from the Underdark. The steel forging technology of the Grey Dwarves could temporarily meet the consumption of the golem factory. As for the other parts that were not enough, he could only find a way to purchase materials from the Northern Witch Council. Although Motor City was developing rapidly, there were still shortcomings in many aspects. The golem army was a very important part of Soren's plan. He had now initially solved the problem of energy supply, and now he was almost solving the shortage of soul crystals. The only difficulty preventing him from building an army of steel golems was how to get enough high-quality steel. The weight of a steel golem was at least 2 tons. Unlike the relatively cheap golems, the steel golems were far more expensive than the golems in terms of craftsmanship and cost. If Soren wanted to build an army of steel golems, the materials consumed would be amazing. With the current level of civilization in the material plane, he might have to rely on himself to find a way. Chapter 887. Lululu was in a bad mood today. Because she met a very strange woman when she went out today. This woman gave her a very intimate vibe at first, and when the other party first met Lulu, she was also very friendly, but her eyes were full of vigor and no one knew what she was thinking. The communication between the two was very good at first, and Lulu also thought that she met a very good person, and maybe they could be good friends in the future. But what happened next was beyond Lulu's expectation. After the woman invited Lulu to play at her hotel, she began to do all kinds of inappropriate things to Lulu. Cat-type war creatures were very sensitive. This wasn't just about the perception of her body, but also about the kindness and malice of others. For example, Soren and Gloria would touch Lulu's little head. The little cat girl could feel a trace of kindness and concern, so she did not reject this kind of touch. But the woman she met today was different. She touched Lulu's ears and put her hands on some places that made Lulu feel very shy. This immediately alerted her, so she jumped out of the window and ran back to the city lord's mansion without a second thought. She was now hesitating whether to tell others about this matter, such as Gloria and Soren, because she always felt that the woman was strange. The material plane, the mountain range. This place was located in the northwest of the continent. It was a land surrounded by mountains, and it was also the gathering place of the Highland dwarves. At this moment, 2 hazy figures appeared here. Soren slowly descended from the sky. He looked at the collapsed mountains in front of him, and his expression became dignified. Is this the place? It seems that the devils have looted everything here. Gloria stared at the collapsed entrance in front of her and murmured, I didn't expect the devils to suddenly attack the dwarves. Soren was also silent. After a while he looked up and said, Let's go in and have a look. The simulacrum doesn't last long. Since we're here, let's see where the devils came from. The third wave of the Avatar crisis had officially broken out. However, what surprised Soren was that the demons' target wasn't the humans, but the highland dwarves who lived in the mountains. All this time, human beings were the first race to be affected by the Avatar crisis. Because the number of human beings was the largest in the material plane and they were scattered all over the world, they were affected the most. According to the normal historical progress, the third wave of the Avatar crisis should also have erupted against human beings, but at present, for some unknown reason, there was a slight change. The first target of the devils was actually the dwarves, and the human territory had not been officially attacked by the devil army for the time being. This could be because of Soren. Because of him, the intensity of the first two waves of attacks had decreased a lot, which also allowed many human cities to preserve a lot of their strength. With the devil's shrewdness, they might not be willing to attack those cities. Of course, the main reason was that many cities had churches and shrines of the gods. Before the impact of the demons played its due role, the demons did not dare to directly confront the churches of the gods. Stone to mud. Gloria raised her hand to cast a spell, and then cleared a passage. Simulacrum only preserved 70 to 80% of the strength. Gloria could not cast many spells now, but fortunately, if the body created by Simulacrum died, it would not affect the main body at all. When encountering a powerful enemy, she could directly cancel the spell. This was a very safe way of projection. The two of them went into the passage. Because the dwarves liked to stay in the mountains or underground, the news was relatively close to the outside world. The battle here had been over for almost 4 or 5 days. And Soren only got the news today. In other words, when he felt the third wave of the Avatar crisis coming a few days ago, the battle here had already broken out. The third wave of impact was not delayed, but it did not fall on humans and Soren did not realize it. There were dead dwarves everywhere. This was a branch of the Highland Dwarves, Rock Fortress. The dwarves of this branch were born with rock-like skin, relatively burly build, and a population of about 10 to 20,000 people. For the dwarves, a fortress with such a large population was close to a big human city. Strange. Why don't I see the devil's body? Gloria looked behind Soren for a while, and her expression suddenly became a little strange. She murmured, "Since we came in, we have seen hundreds of dead dwarves. Why can't we even see a devil's body?" After all, she was not a melee profession and some hidden things could not be seen at all. Soren turned and glanced at her, then turned over one of the dead dwarves. The face of the dead dwarf still had the expression of horror before death, and his face was a little black, which proved that he was poisoned before death. Soren pointed to the fatal wound near the back of the neck of the dead dwarf and slowly said, "The wound is on the back of the neck, which proves that the enemy attacked from behind. Looking at the wound, it should be left by the bone demon. These dwarves were killed on the way to escape, and the gate was right in front of them. They wanted to escape from here before they died. Looking at the signs of the gate's collapse, it should be man-made. The purpose is to make sure that none of these dwarves can escape. So many of these corpses looked desperate before they died. The devils didn't attack from the outside. If I'm not wrong, they attacked from the bottom of the fortress. When the battle here happened, everything was almost over. So there is no devil's body here because it was just the end of the battle to eliminate the deserters." As if to confirm Soren's words, when they were about to approach the lower passage, the bodies of the devils began to appear. The first corpses that appeared were chain demons, then some bone demons' corpses. Compared to the dead devils, there were more dwarves' corpses. Obviously, the battle was not at the same level at all. From the nearly 10-to-1 casualty ratio, this was almost a crushing massacre. Gloria's face became more and more dignified as she murmured, "I'm afraid that the equipment of these dwarves is stronger than the regular army of Mordor. Even the dwarves were slaughtered. If these devils attacked Mordor, the consequences would be unimaginable." The Highland dwarves were well equipped. Dwarves were born to be masters of forging. Their equipment level was the highest among all races on average. Almost all dwarven warriors had a set of excellent enchanted equipment, and their natural strength and physique made their starting point higher than humans. But from what they saw, these dwarves, who were far more powerful than humans, were completely slaughtered. These are not ordinary devils. Soren paused when he heard Gloria's words, then waved his hand toward the ground, and the emblem on a devil's corpse fell into his palm. Gloria saw his movements and wondered, "What did you find?" Soren opened his palm and showed her. Gloria's face changed slightly when she saw the emblem and murmured, "The Grand Duke of the Devil, Bayer?" Soren nodded slowly. This was a special emblem that did not belong to any god's church, but belonged to a special devil. the commander of the bloody war, Bayer. The lord of the first layer of the Bator Inferno, the leader of the 8 generals of hell, and the supreme commander in charge of commanding the devil army in the Abyss bloody war. Gloria was naturally very knowledgeable as a legendary wizard. Although Bayer's emblem was not common, she still recognized it at a glance. There was a short silence. Then Gloria's voice was a little dry. It was the bloody war that attacked here. Bloody war. When these 2 words were mentioned, Gloria's voice obviously hesitated. However, when Soren nodded silently, her expression suddenly became more dignified than ever. She looked at Soren and said slowly, "I'm afraid this material plane is going to face a great catastrophe." Chapter 888. It has been raining heavily for the past 2 days, and the water level in my hometown has risen. Fu Tu himself took a video of others fishing on the street. Tomorrow he will send it to the public WeChat account for you to see. In addition, he also said that he also caught a grass carp weighing 3 pounds in front of his house. The deeper they went underground, the more dwarf corpses there were. However, the approximate casualty ratio was still maintained at 10-1. The lives of 10 dwarf warriors could be exchanged for the life of a middle-level devil. The devils who invaded here basically did not have low-level cannon fodder. All of them were elite troops who had officially participated in the bloody battle. The efficiency of slaughtering these dwarves was simple and neat. The only place where the Devil Legion paid more casualties was near the temple area. That is, the place where the main god of the dwarf divine system, Moradin, was enshrined. The divine power and the glory of faith that shrouded the temple area had dissipated. The Devil Legion somehow polluted the temple and completely destroyed it at the same time, eliminating the connection with the gods. During the period of the Avatar crisis, the defense of the temple was very amazing. However, now that the power of the gods was seriously damaged, the temple could only retain a little of its original power. No god would take the risk to directly send an incarnation to guard the temple. The main god of the temple was the dwarf god, Moradin. In addition, the temple area also worshipped 2 other gods. One was the dwarf god of exploration, Dumasun, and the other was the dwarf god of theft, Vegadin. Both of these gods were mid-level divine power. The former mainly explored treasures, minerals, secret treasures, and so on. It had a wide range of beliefs among the dwarves and miners. The latter was the god of the dwarves who was in charge of wealth, luck, and opportunity. He also had the divine domain of dwarves, luck, trade, craftiness, and so on. He was also the god of theft. Obviously, Vegadin was much better off. Wealth and luck were 2 very important divine domains. Under normal circumstances, there would be a treasure trove under Vegadin's temple. Soren took a look and found that a secret room had been opened. The demons seemed to be aware of this as well. After conquering the dwarven fortress, they brought back most of the valuable spoils back to the dwarves. Unlike the demons in other planes, the demons in the first and second layers of the Bator Inferno often dealt with merchants from other planes, so they cared more about gold and silver coins. They knew that they could use these coins to buy supplies from the plane merchants. There were many planes in the multiverse. It was common to see human planar merchants in the Bator Inferno, but they didn't come from the material planes. Most of them came from other demi-planes and even special places like Sigil City. As long as there was profit to be made, the devils would deal with any race or creature. Below the dwarven fortress was a huge furnace. Soren sensed the presence of the dimensional crack from here. No wonder the dwarves were caught off guard. It turned out that the demons suddenly emerged from the flames near the furnace. Many devils were immune to fire damage, so it would be difficult to defend a dwarven fortress from here. However, this also proved that this group of demons had done their research before attacking. They knew the structure of the fortress and the contents of the information. This was different from the other devil lords. It was obviously the work of Bardi. It's almost time. Gloria didn't look too good after walking around this place full of corpses. The witches were a little spoiled, so she didn't see many of the mountains of corpses and seas of blood that were common to close combat professions. The simulacrum spell didn't last long. It was almost time for it to wear off. Soren looked around and nodded. Cancel the spell. Let's go back. There's nothing valuable here. As the spell was lifted, the figures of the 2 people disappeared from the spot. The next moment, Soren walked out of the study. Gloria also walked out of the laboratory with a serious look on her face. I have something to talk to you about. Gloria walked to Soren's side and said seriously, everything I saw today is really, if Mordor was attacked like this and we happened to not be in the city, I'm afraid it would be impossible to resist such an attack with the defensive power of Mordor. I want to test the defense system of the magic lock recently. Then arrange steel golems in some positions. These golems won't be activated usually, but once the city is attacked, the magic lock will automatically activate the defense system in the city and let the steel golems step on the battlefield immediately. Activating the device. Just like what Soren found in the arcane ruins, after triggering the alarm, the defense measures would be automatically activated, and the golem army would appear immediately to eliminate the invaders. This was a relatively subtle application, and it had to be attached to the magic lock. Soren nodded and said, "Okay. After a while the production of steel golems will increase a lot. At that time we will test the defense system of Mordor." Okay. Gloria nodded and then said, "By the way, Mother wants to do a large-scale experiment in a few days. She may need your help to ensure safety." Large-scale experiment? Could it be the study of elemental fission? Soren's face changed slightly when he heard that, but Gloria seemed to understand his thoughts. She gently lifted her long hair and said, "Don't worry. It's not the study of elemental fission. The information we have at present is not enough to carry out experiments. What Mother wants to do is to raise the floating space tower and then teleport directly to the astral world. This is a very important experiment. If the results are successful, we can go to and from the astral world at any time through the arcane tower, and we can use the ability of the floating space tower to collect the astral sand. The floating space ring and other materials need some materials from the astral world. If the arcane tower can go to and from the astral world freely, we can try to build it into a small fortress, just like the steel fortress of the Githyankis floating in the astral world. So that's how it is. Soren thought about it and suddenly felt that it was a good idea. The resources of the astral world were huge. Although he could easily go to and from the astral world, it was very troublesome to collect them by his own strength. If the arcane tower could also be teleported to the astral world, then it would be equivalent to having a small base, which would be beneficial for Mordor City's storage of various resources. They could even use the arcane tower to track meteorites and meteors in the astral world. Maybe. They could also find a completely diamondized meteor. Yes. Soren nodded immediately and said, "Let me know when the teleportation experiment is carried out." Right. Is the current energy supply of Mordor City enough to maintain the floating space tower to and from the astral world? Gloria and Fallen, which were responsible for the research in this area. Soren didn't know much about it. Gloria thought for a moment and said softly, "It should be a little difficult at the moment, but according to the original plan, Mordor City's demand for astral world's resources will increase in the future, so the experiment of astral world teleportation has been brought forward." Understood. Soren nodded. The two then discussed some other things and then Gloria went back to her laboratory. Soren was also ready to go to the temple. However, at this moment he suddenly sensed a trace of divine power fluctuation. It was actually near the city lord's mansion. There was a god's incarnation, or perhaps even the main body. It actually dared to sneak into the vicinity of his headquarters. Who is it? Soren stopped suddenly and then his figure disappeared. Judging from the fluctuation of divine power, the level of the other party's divine power was much lower than Soren's. It was very likely that it was a minor divine power, or a lesser divine power. As a true god of the Order Evil alignment, Soren did not have many allies. And most of them would not come uninvited. Most of Soren's allies were above the intermediate divine power, such as the goddess of the sea, the goddess of wealth, the goddess of agriculture, and so on. Soren rarely dealt with weak gods. He didn't know whether the true god who quietly entered Mordor City was kind or malicious, but seeing him sneaking close to Soren's base, it should belong to the kind of purpose that couldn't be exposed. Now he wanted to see who actually sneaked into Mordor City. Chapter 889. The visitor seemed to be a woman. Soren's figure blended into the shadows, and he silently watched the goddess who was wandering outside the walls of his house. She seemed to be ready to climb over the wall but was a little scared. According to his first judgment, Soren determined that the other party was a goddess with minor divine power. There were not many goddesses with this level of divine power. According to their appearance he could judge which ones they were. There were many female gods in the Pantheon Temple. But looking at the characteristics of the visitor's behavior, as well as her natural slightly frivolous aura, Soren could almost guess the identity of the other party. The goddess of cats and pleasure, Cherise. There was a passage about her that recorded, Cherise likes to tease handsome and beautiful mortals very much. She can't help but flirt with everyone she meets. However, whenever her passion is satisfied and subsides, Cherise will soon feel troubled and tired, and once again set out to find new excitement. She hates the snake creatures, controlled by Seth, very much. Looking at the entire Pantheon temple, there were two most frivolous and flirtatious goddesses. One was the goddess of love, Shuni, and the other was the goddess of cats and pleasure, Cherise. He had long heard of Cherise's great name, especially the matter of her being taught by the Lady of the Night. It was widely spread among many adventurers back then. However, today was the first time that Soren met the goddess of cats and pleasure. He was still a little curious about the goddess in front of him. This was because the other party was currently pacing back and forth outside the walls of his house. It seemed like he wanted to do something bad. However, this sneaky look didn't seem like he wanted to do anything bad. He guessed that it was just a petty thief. Cherise was a woman with a plump body. Her current appearance should be disguised. A god like her couldn't walk around with her original appearance because it was said that her beauty was comparable to the goddess of love. Soren stood in place and watched for a while. He found that Cherise seemed to be very hesitant. Judging from the current situation, there was something in Soren's house that attracted her and made her want to go in. However, Soren's existence also made her feel a little afraid. She only dared to secretly stand outside the wall and hesitate, but she didn't move for a long time. "You don't look like you want to do anything bad?" Soren smiled and shook his head. He didn't want to waste time with the goddess in front of him. He directly cancelled his sneak and appeared behind her. He slowly said, "Lady Cherise, I don't know why you've been wandering outside my walls for so long." Whoosh! A cold light flashed. The sharp claws instantly attacked Soren, but Soren didn't seem to care. He casually waved his hand and blocked the enemy's attack with his bare hands. At the same time, he shook his hand and directly used the monk's hidden strength to send the enemy flying. To be honest, there weren't many goddesses in the Pantheon who had real combat strength. Although many of the female gods were in charge of very important positions, many of them were related to their nature. As for their combat strength, there were only a few that needed to be paid attention to. It couldn't be helped. Women were born with the ability to give birth to children, which was a very important part of the position. The sudden appearance of Soren obviously shocked the cat and pleasure goddess, Cherise. She was now like a cat with its fur standing on end. She immediately attacked Soren. When it came to a cat with its fur standing on end, it had to be said that this sentence was very vivid. This was because the cat and pleasure goddess, Cherise's weapon was called giant cat claws. It was a pair of divine claws. That's right. This goddess was a cat lover, and her personality was very similar to that of felines. Her first priesthood was cat. Soren. The counterattack was easily blocked by Soren. The cat and pleasure goddess, Cherise, also calmed down a little. After seeing Soren, she immediately guessed his identity. Because in the entire Mordor city, the only person who had the ability to find her and quietly approach her without her noticing was probably Soren, who had the clergy of Shadow and Rogue. Cherise's expression was a little awkward, but there was still a trace of nervousness and fear. Soren's fierce name made her feel uneasy. "I just happened to pass by here." The cat and pleasure goddess seemed to be frightened by Soren and stammered a little. Soren smiled and said slowly, "Miss Cherise, you can't possibly think that such a lousy lie can fool me, right? If that's the case, then I'm afraid you're insulting my IQ. It just so happens that my church is going to hold a large-scale celebration. Otherwise, I'll make you perform a dance at the celebration as a punishment. For example, your favorite night dance." Speaking of this, Soren's expression suddenly became a little malicious. Hearing Soren's words, Cherise's face suddenly turned pale, especially the night dance. That was her favorite dance when she was at her lowest. The cat and pleasure goddess didn't know why Soren even knew this kind of thing, but in the current situation she could only confess. So, Cherise seemed to give up resistance and said, "I was bored and came out to travel. When I was traveling in Mordor City, I happened to meet a cat girl. Now the number of cat war creatures is very rare. It's so rare that even the gods can't meet them so easily. I liked this cat girl very much, so I secretly followed her. I didn't expect to run near your house. I also hesitated for a long time, not knowing whether to go in or not." The truth. When the goddess of cat and pleasure spoke again, Soren was ready to detect lies. But what he never thought was that the real reason that came out of the other party's mouth was so speechless. No wonder her believers were a bunch of idiots. This was a typical example of a crooked stick having a crooked shadow. Like an unreliable god, there would be a group of unreliable believers. That's my sister's little maid. Soren glanced at her and knew what she was thinking. He slowly said, "It's impossible for her to be your believer. Moreover, in the current turbulent situation you can't even protect yourself and you still want to run around. As a god, I feel a little worried about your thoughts." Hearing Soren's words, the cat and pleasure goddess's face suddenly turned a little red. She was a goddess with wanderlust. During the last time of troubles, she also fell into the trap of the Lady of Night because she ran around blindly. Unexpectedly, she still didn't learn her lesson. With the current situation in the material plane, Sherry should be obediently hiding behind the goddess of love to seek protection. After all, the goddess of love was also a great god and she more or less had the ability to protect her. The Lady of Night is currently missing. Soren looked at the cat and pleasure goddess in front of him and slowly said, "But she has never forgotten that you escaped from her hands." Hearing Soren's words, Sherry's face suddenly changed. She could feel a trace of kindness from Soren, but the nature of a cat made her dislike being disciplined like a child. After all, she was a goddess. A true goddess. And it was many years earlier than Sauron's ascension. But she couldn't refute Soren's words because with her strength she really couldn't protect herself when facing many enemies. Currently she was safe only because of the disguise of a god. If she met an enemy who could see through her disguise and craftiness, then Sherry's would be in a very dangerous situation. Facing the silent cat and the goddess of joy, Soren thought for a moment and waved his hand. A golden light of divinity shot directly to a corner of the port of Moder, followed by another light of divinity. The next moment, a hazy figure appeared in the temple of the goddess of joy and quickly approached Soren's position. It couldn't be helped. After all, Sherry's was still a true goddess. Soren could talk to her, but he couldn't discipline her. He had a good impression of the goddess in front of him, so he might as well form a good relationship with her. To deal with this kind of wanderlust goddess, Soren could only use his trump card. Parent, please? Because of the past history, the cat and pleasure goddess, Sherry's, had always been under the goddess of love, which was equivalent to half a god of the goddess of love. You all know the relationship between the two priesthoods, pleasure and love, so to a certain extent the goddess of love was her parent. For this goddess with great divine power, Soren felt that it was still necessary to have a little contact with her. No matter what, he would first get to know her and form a good relationship with her. There would always be a use for her in the future. Just right. Today he could use the reason of catching the cat and pleasure goddess home, let the goddess of joy contact the goddess of love, and then directly bring Sherry's back. So that she wouldn't always run into danger outside, and also take the opportunity to meet the goddess of love. Chapter 890. After the goddess of joy landed on the ground, she turned into a beautiful girl. When she saw the cat and the goddess of joy next to her, she was immediately taken aback and said, "Cherise, why are you here? When did you come to Mordor?" Unlike the cat and the goddess of joy, Leo was the real goddess of love. As soon as the goddess of joy saw Cherise, she guessed what had happened. Then, she bowed slightly to Soren to express her gratitude. Then, as if she had a troublesome younger sister at home, she shook her head and said, "I didn't expect Cherise to run around at this time. I'll inform Lady Shuni now and let her take Cherise back." Although the goddess of joy had appeared in front of her, Karis still didn't seem too happy. However, after hearing the name of the goddess of love, Shuni, she finally felt a little scared. Her expression also became a lot more honest, but her eyes still looked like she had her own thoughts. As a goddess of chaos who had wanderlust, Cherise did not like to be disciplined, but in the face of the goddess of love, she often did not have any temper at all. Because the other party was indeed a very powerful god, and she had saved her life before. The goddess of joy was extremely efficient. About a few minutes later, a golden light appeared in the temple of joy, and then it fell directly in front of Soren. A god's avatar. Obviously, the goddess of love would not come to Mordor in person. Sending an avatar was the most convenient and safest thing. May love be with you. Dear Lord of Shadows. Teacher of the rogues. Protector of the half-elves. The goddess of love. Shuni was a beautiful woman with long red hair. She was mature, elegant, and full of enthusiasm that could infect anyone. Just like what was recorded in the books, the goddess of love liked to appear as a beautiful woman with long shining hair. She also liked to be flattered and praised just like what was written in the books. Many gods thought that the goddess of love was an insignificant and not dangerous person, just like most of her believers. They were all regarded as frivolous and superficial people who loved vanity, but there was no danger in this. Although she did not have a fighting divinity. However, Soren knew one thing for sure. Any god with great divine power would not be easy to deal with when they got serious. If the goddess of love were to really unleash her full power, gods like the goddess of ocean, the goddess of agriculture, and the goddess of wealth would not be her match at all. No matter what, she was still a great divine power who had existed for a long time. This was the first time the goddess of love, Shuni, had addressed Soren in a formal manner, so Soren returned the greeting. He bowed slightly and said, "Welcome. The embodiment of love and beauty. Your Excellency Shuni." The official title of the goddess of love was the goddess of love and beauty. Her core priesthood was beauty, love and passion. She likes anything beautiful. When Soren called her the embodiment of love and kindness, he was actually flattering her. Just as Soren had expected, the goddess of love was very satisfied with the way Soren addressed her. A warm smile immediately appeared on her beautiful face. She slowly said, "Thank you very much, Sir Soren. If not for you, Cherise would have been in big trouble this time." At this moment, the goddess of love was like a mother or elder sister who felt helpless towards her rebellious little girl. There was a trace of doting, a trace of worry and a trace of helplessness. She was also in charge of a part of the protection, priesthood. The goddess of love was a passionate and kind goddess. Regardless of her personal life, Shuni was a worthy divine ally just based on her personality. This was because she was always willing to lend a helping hand to her allies. This was not an exaggeration at all. In the long history of the goddess of Silver Moon, she had once been at her weakest. At that time she was so weak that she was weak. Because she was no match for the goddess of night, she had even sought refuge under the goddess of love as half of her god. Later on, the goddess of Silver Moon recovered part of her power and began to search for her own path again. The goddess of love did not hesitate to let her go and had always been her staunch ally. It was the same for the cat and the goddess of joy. In order to save her, the goddess of love had completely offended the goddess of night. Because of this, the two gods had secretly competed with each other. In order to resist the revenge of the goddess of night, the goddess of love had always been secretly supporting the goddess of magic and the goddess of Silver Moon. She was now quite friendly towards Soren, and this was also related to another reason. This was an alliance of the goddesses of the pantheon. This faction of goddesses included the goddess of magic, the goddess of love, the goddess of Silver Moon, the goddess of joy, the goddess of cat and dance, the goddess of music, and so on. Even the goddess of wealth was once a member of this faction, but she had slowly faded away. It was worth mentioning that the goddess of love also used a whip as a weapon. It was a whip called the soft silk belt. Soren had always thought that it was called the whip of love, but he did not expect it to be such a common name. He did not know why. Many of the goddesses of the pantheon liked to use whips as weapons. The goddess of love was a target that could be roped in. She was not a threat to Soren, but she had the combat power of a great god. For Shuni's kindness, Soren gave a sufficient response. However, the goddess obviously did not intend to stay in Mordor for too long. After capturing the cat and the goddess of joy, she said to Soren, "Mistra's whereabouts are unknown." The name of the goddess of magic? Sir Soren, you have to be careful now. It is said that the goddess of night has returned. I'm worried that she has some conspiracy against others. Shar. The embodiment of night, the axis of evil. The goddess of love's hint was obviously related to Soren's mastery of the shadow, priesthood, because these were the priesthoods that the goddess of night had always wanted. The goddess of magic was still missing. However, according to the goddess of love's tone, the goddess of night seemed to have signs of returning. This was not good news. In the current situation, the biggest enemy of the goddess of night was undoubtedly the goddess of Silver Moon. However, because of the priesthood of shadow, Soren would definitely be in the forefront of the goddess of night's attention. It was necessary to win over the goddess of love. Soren knew very well that when fighting against the oldest great divine power, he must have some other great divine power allies around him. I understand. Soren nodded and said to the goddess of love, "I'll be very careful." Shuni smiled when she heard this. She was still so enthusiastic. Maybe it was because of her priesthood or maybe it was because of her natural personality, the goddess could maintain a good attitude even during the turbulent times. She smiled at Soren and said, "I see the glory of love in you. And it seems that more than one lady is attached to you. I will send you my blessings." I hope that becoming a god will not make you lose your yearning for love. Who said that gods shouldn't have such sincere feelings? A pleasant chuckle sounded. The figure of the goddess of love gradually dissipated into light, and the goddess of joy, who had been unhappy, was also taken back by her. This goddess was indeed different from the other gods. Her emotions were much richer than the other gods. With the departure of the goddess of love, the goddess of joy bowed slightly to Soren, and then her avatar dissipated into the temple. Soren stayed where he was and fell into deep thought. To some extent, meeting the goddess of love today had given him some inspiration. He had always been learning how to become a god according to his own ideas, but true gods had their own paths. The goddess of the ocean used cruelty to rule the sea. The goddess of wealth used benefits to win over merchants. The goddess of agriculture used love to win over believers. Every god seemed to have their own way of doing things, and these were all paths that belonged to them. As a new god, Soren did not join any gods, so he naturally did not have any gods to guide him. He had to explore everything on his own. Now, he also needed to start thinking about his own way of doing things as a true god in the future. P.S. Come. I'll give you a group buff. Blessing of the goddess of love, and love's whip. Chapter 891. The city of Mordor was a pearl overseas. Although Soren's actions gradually became low-key, especially after he became a god, his interference in secular power gradually decreased. But as the core of the south coast, the city of Mordor still attracted enough attention from outsiders. Now some gods' churches began to pay attention to the city. It seemed that many believers of gods began to appear in the city of Mordor unknowingly. Some of them visited blatantly, and some came here quietly to observe everything here. A merchant ship gradually approached the port of Mordor. Carlton carefully put away a badge engraved with the words "Open Rolling Scroll," then put on a scholar's robe and slowly walked out of the cabin. The port of Mordor was more lively than the rumors said. However, the purpose of Carlton's trip was not simply to travel. The church sent him to the outer islands in the hope that he could record and preserve everything here. He was a believer of Agma, the god of knowledge. A powerful god who was absolutely neutral was also an outsider to this world. The believers of the Church of Knowledge often told a myth about the beginning of the world. Shortly after Surin, Lady of the Night, and Shar, Lady of the Silver Moon, created the material plane, and the birth of the goddess of the earth, Chantia, a traveler came here from a very distant country. When the traveler came to this world, he saw that the whole world was chaotic, and many changing concepts needed to be settled. Over the next billion years, the traveler defined and named each concept. The name bestowed by the traveler created a power that solidified all the originally unpredictable concepts, forming a physical world. This traveler was Agma. He was a god from outside the world and one of the ancient gods of the material plane. Agma was a conservative god, but in a long history he had been strictly fulfilling his duties. The rise of Mordor entered the eyes of this ancient god, so his church also began to pay attention to the city and sent believers to the outer islands to record everything here. Carlton did not stay in the port for long. After getting off the ship, he quickly took out a small notebook and began to record everything he saw along the way. However, this believer who was loyal to his mission did not notice that when he just started to record, everything he did had already been seen by some people in the dark. At the same time, the staff in the merchant ship was soon interrogated, and then the information about him along the way was sent to the high-level officials of Mordor City. A believer of the god of knowledge? Don't worry about him. As long as it didn't involve the forbidden area of Mordor City. If he wants to go anywhere else, let him go. Soren was the first to know about this. However, Soren did not care much about the god of knowledge. This god did not have much interaction with Soren. If there was one, it would be that Agma was one of the foreign gods. This clearly proved that there were other gods in the multiverse besides the gods that were connected to the material plane. In other words, they could be called gods of the crystal wall system. The number of divine seats in the Pantheon Temple could not be calculated, but at least from the point of view of the gods that were connected to the material plane, it was obvious that they could not fill so many seats in the Pantheon Temple. Soren was not surprised by the existence of foreign gods. At present, Naruto, who was more famous in the desert, was also one of the foreign gods because his core belief was still in another world. A material world that was very similar to the current plane. Of course. The Queen of Spiders, Lolth, also had a belief in that world, but the core of her belief was still in the current material plane. The collapse of the belief network scattered a lot of Soren's energy. He had to spend a few hours every day dealing with and responding to the prayers of believers, which forced him to postpone many of his original plans. However, it was also because of this that Soren was also familiar with the duties of a god. At least, he knew how to be a god without the belief network, how to deal with the relationship with believers, and how to respond to the prayers of devout believers. This kind of experience was very precious. It was like people who were used to using the internet began to learn how to do their work without using the internet. The experiment is about to begin. About a few minutes later, Gloria's figure appeared in the study. She nodded to Soren and said seriously, "The floating space tower's astral teleportation experiment is about to begin. Mother asked me to invite you over." Soren stood up and walked in the direction of the arcane tower. This was a very important experiment. In the process of interdimensional teleportation, the various functions of the arcane tower may be overloaded. If such a situation occurred, the floating space tower would most likely not be able to maintain flight. At that time, Soren would need to transform into a god to drag the entire floating space tower to prevent the arcane tower from crashing into the city of Moder and causing an irreparable disaster. As soon as Soren arrived, the fallen which started the teleportation process. With the cold metal sound of thalling, the arcane tower gradually rose into the air. The elemental furnace is activated. The mana transmission system is activated. The teleportation circle is activated. The astral beacon is locked. The elemental pool is activated. The energy shield is activated. The teleportation circle is being transported. Countdown to activation. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A dazzling brilliance emerged. The next moment, the floating space tower, which was suspended about 100 meters in the air, disappeared. Soren's figure also instantly transformed into a god's form and disappeared directly from the material plane with the floating space tower. There was a deep darkness. In the boundless astral world, a crack suddenly appeared in the darkness, and then with the faint brilliance of the magic lock, a tower with a radius of about 150 meters appeared in the void with no gravity and no air. The teleportation is complete. The floating space tower has arrived in the astral world. Calculating the deviation of the teleportation beacon. The teleportation distance has deviated by 300 meters. With the thalling sound, Gloria and the fallen witch, who had been on tenterhooks, breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Then Gloria said, "Activate the elemental tower. Start collecting the astral sand." Thalling monitored the abnormal situation nearby. A tower about 15 meters high rose. Along with the faint radiance above, the silver-white matter floating in the astral plane gradually began to gather toward it. Like a magnet, it attracted the silver-white matter that resembled quicksand, and below it, the steel golems were continuously transporting it away. It's a success. Next, as long as we collect enough astral sand, then we can make more large floating space rings. Fallen Witch's voice became lighter and she said to Soren, "The teleportation is complete. You can leave the next thing to us. If you have something to do now, you can return to Mordor City first." He had to say. Gloria and Fallen Witch's ability to do things was really first class. Since there was nothing for him to do here, Soren was naturally ready to return to Mordor City. However, just as he was about to return to the material plane, a bright brilliance suddenly flashed in the distant void, and then Soren's eyes widened in surprise and he said in a deep voice, "I seem to see a Githyanki steel fortress." Chapter 892. Astral Fortress. Under normal circumstances, one could only encounter the fortresses of the following three races in the boundless astral world. They were the Githyankis, the Githzerai, and the ancient Mind Flayers. It was mentioned a long time ago that in the distant ancient times, the Mind Flayers once created a brilliant interdimensional civilization and used the astral world as a transit point to control and enslave a large number of other races. The Grey Dwarves and the Githyankis were victims of the Mind Flayers' empire, and they were even forced to obtain the talent of psionic abilities during their long enslavement. The Mind Flayers used psionic energy, also known as psionic energy, to develop an extremely powerful interstellar civilization. They were an alien species from other worlds, and it was even said that the Mind Flayers who arrived here were in a huge astral world ship. The destruction of the Mind Flayers' empire allowed the Githyankis to inherit a lot of precious knowledge and abilities. Compared with the psionic talent of the Grey Dwarves, the Githyankis had more precious knowledge. They learned how to build the astral fortress, learned very high-end forging techniques, and adapted to the environment of the astral world. They were as evil as bandits, using the astral world as a springboard to plunder the resources of other worlds. The Githyanki could appear in any plane. Their race used the astral world fortress as their foundation and could enter all the worlds they could enter. The Githyanki liked to plunder. But if the target was strong enough, they would also learn to trade fairly. In the lower planes, there were evil Githyanki who used things from the astral world to trade with the Yugalos. As for the other kind of Githzerai, the path of monks prevailed within them, and they had not dealt with humans for many years. The Githzerai pursued the mystery of the mind. They believed that the deepest part of the mind hid the true self and power, and therefore they highly advocated the path of monks. They were the race with the most monks. They and the Githyanki were mortal enemies. Unfortunately, there were not many of them, and the probability of encountering them was very small. Note: only some ancient monasteries in the Eastern Kingdom still retain contact with the Githzerai. Hearing Soren's words, Gloria and Fallen which suddenly became nervous. It was a well-known point. The astral plane was filled with all kinds of dangers and there wasn't enough order here. Therefore, it was very normal to encounter battles and plunder when exploring the astral plane. The star boundary was really too big. Most of the creatures living in this dangerous environment were very unfriendly. Whether it was the astral fortress of the Mind Flayers or the astral fortress of the Githyanki, they did not mind robbing other astral explorers or capturing them as their slaves if they were strong enough. There were no laws in the astral plane. Both the Mind Flayers and the Githyanki loved to enslave other creatures and regarded slaves as an important part of their wealth. They're approaching us. When Soren first saw the steel fortress moving forward in the silver-white quicksand, he was quite surprised and curious because the probability of encountering Githyanki in the astral boundary was very low, and the probability of encountering their steel fortress was even lower. These steel fortresses drifted in the endless astral boundary. Unless it was a wanderer who drifted in the astral boundary all year round, the probability of encountering them was similar to encountering the gods and saints by chance during the time of troubles. Under normal circumstances, encountering the steel fortress of the Githyanki was not a good thing because it meant that you might have to face the plunder of a Githyanki army. It was very obvious. When Soren discovered the steel fortress of the Githyanki, they also discovered the small floating space tower in the astral boundary. The Githyanki had a natural psionic ability. Their steel fortress was shrouded in a powerful psionic force field, just like the High Priest's psionic domain. In the dark astral boundary, the Githyanki could find any energy fluctuations nearby that were strong enough. This made it easy for them to avoid danger and find targets to plunder. There was no doubt about it. In the perception of the Githyanki, this floating space tower drifting alone in the astral boundary was considered a target that they could plunder. Under normal circumstances, when encountering such a floating space tower in the astral boundary, at most, there would be one or two great wizards in the legendary realm. Many astral wanderers like to use the floating space tower as a base to explore and search in the endless astral boundary. The bold Githyanki often attacked those astral boundary explorers by relying on their large numbers and their adaptation to the astral boundary. Under normal circumstances, if this kind of plunder was successful, the Githyanki could get a lot of wealth. It seems that they treat us as targets to plunder. Soren couldn't help but smile, and he said to Gloria with some ridicule, "They are accelerating towards us. I have to say, I'm afraid these Githyanki are going to be disappointed." If Soren wasn't there. With the strength of Gloria and Fallen which alone, suddenly encountering a steel fortress of the Githyanki in the astral boundary, the situation could still be dangerous. But if there was a intermediate divine power god in charge, then the situation would be completely different. Soren wasn't nervous at all. Instead, he was interested to see how these Githyanki planned to rob him. Their banditry had spread throughout the multiverse. Perhaps the people above were preparing for a big fight. "You're really calm." Gloria glared at Soren angrily and then said seriously, "The energy shield of the floating space tower is not stable. We can't let the Githyanki destroy the structure of the floating space tower. Otherwise it will be difficult for us to teleport it back. And the elemental furnace is also inside. At present, the research of the floating space tower has spent about 5 million kindler on it. If the Githyanki destroy it, it's up to you then." Soren still had a relaxed expression at first, but after listening to Gloria's words, he suddenly became a little nervous. He was not nervous that he couldn't beat this group of Githyanki, but he was worried that if the floating space tower was destroyed, what should he do then? With the current financial situation of Motor City, It was absolutely impossible to take out such a large sum of money to rebuild the floating space tower. Moreover, the floating space tower was now the lifeblood of Gloria and Fallen Witch. If it was really destroyed by the Githyanki's, Soren's life would not be as happy as it was now. Chapter 893. The floating space tower was actually very fragile. At least before the core energy protection force field of the floating space city of the Arcane Empire was understood, the current floating space tower's protection level was about equivalent to a large-scale six-circle energy protection force field spell. Such a level of protection could only support Soren's full blow in the form of a god. It would only take a few attacks to fight against the Githyanki's, and the floating space tower itself would have to withstand the damage. No one could say for sure what parts would be damaged in the process. As for the cost of maintenance, it was naturally high. The earth elemental pool affected the gravity inside the floating space tower. The wind elemental pool affected the air inside the floating space tower. The fire elemental pool maintained the temperature of the floating space tower itself. The current role of the water elemental pool was not very obvious. At least before Gloria and Fallen Witch were ready to expand, the water elemental pool did not play much of a role. The four elemental pools maintained the normal operation of the floating space tower in the astral world. In the face of the plundering of the Githyanki's, Soren had to ensure that the elemental pool would not be attacked in addition to defeating them. Otherwise the consequences would be disastrous. The huge astral world fortress gradually approached. After seeing the huge iron lump in front of them, Gloria and Soren's eyes lit up. But the first to speak was Fallen Witch. She said seriously, Mordor City is currently preparing to make steel golems. At present, the steel reserves of Mordor City are not enough to sustain the consumption of a steel golem legion. And now, it seems that a huge iron lump is approaching us. According to the preliminary judgment, these steels are all simply enchanted with astral world materials. If we have them to make steel golems, the strength should be improved by a level. Mordor City lacked steel. No matter how hard Soren tried to strengthen the foundation of Mordor City, some things still needed time to accumulate. Originally, Soren's plan was to purchase a batch of enchanted forged steel from the northern witches, and then figure out a way by himself. However, based on the current situation, it seemed that there was no need for him to think of any other way. If they could tear down the steel fortress in front of them, it would definitely be more than enough for Mordor City to make a group of steel golems. The Githyanki's had quite good forging skills. They wandered in the astral boundary all year round to plunder other creatures, and the materials used to make steel fortresses were naturally excellent. Something must be mentioned here. The steel fortress of the Githyanki's was similar to a half-plane. They lived inside with militarized management. In addition to daily plundering, the Githyanki's also cultivated food. That was right. They farmed inside the huge steel fortress. What did this mean? This meant that there was a good elemental balance within the steel fortress, and it even met the requirements for farming. With the simplest logical reasoning, it could be concluded that the gravity inside the steel fortress was very stable. The balance of the earth and water elements was enough for plants to grow. The fire element maintained the temperature very close to the material plane. The balance of the four elements directly transformed the steel fortress into a private kingdom that could be lived in for a long time in the astral plane, and it also met the requirements of the Githyanki's in all aspects. Of course, this also meant that the entire steel fortress was very huge. A steel fortress represented a group of Githyanki's, which may take them decades or even hundreds of years to complete. As the distance was getting closer little by little, Soren also estimated the diameter of the steel fortress. The height was about 100 meters and the diameter should be close to 2 kilometers. It looked like a semi-permanent interstellar fortress. How many tons of steel is there? According to Soren's judgment, the interior of the astral fortress must be divided into residential areas, military areas, storage areas, farming areas, and so on. With the use of psionic power, the interior space was definitely larger than what it looked like from the outside. Judging from this, if this steel fortress was demolished, Soren's golem army would definitely consume a lot of energy. Be careful. They look like they are going to attack. As a mid-level god, Soren was keenly aware of the aura of psionic power. The birth of the astral fortress was inseparable from the psionic factions, Creator, Psionic Creation. This was because the Creator had a legendary level psionic spell called Creation Spell. In short, it was to directly create a new half-bit wall in the astral plane. Genesis X, Level 9 Psionic Spell. Create a new half-bit wall in the astral plane. The steel fortress in the distance was getting closer and closer. When a psionic power field began to cover the floating space tower, some psionic warriors of the Githyanki's appeared above the steel fortress. The characteristics of their race allowed them to adapt to the environment of the astral plane. The psionic shield protected them and allowed them to live freely and independently in the astral plane for a long time. With their appearance, a strong energy glow appeared above the astral fortress, and then psionic shock waves directly hit the protective force field of the floating space tower. These Githyankis were smart. They understood that the effect of the protective force field was amazing. It could be directly understood as an invisible force field shield. Before the energy protective force field was broken, any of their attacks would suffer huge losses. The energy protective force field could block most of the physical damage at least before it was broken. A high-grade wizard's deflected energy protective force field could even resist a wave of storm-like shooting attacks head-on. The Githyankis used psionic shock waves. They wanted to directly break the energy protective force field of the floating space tower. Thaling number 1. Start the elemental furnace. Open the magic lock. Start the magic lock protective force field. Gloria's reaction was also very fast. In an instant, she ordered the activation of the elemental furnace, and then the magic lock connected to the arcane tower was activated. With a surge of arcane energy, the surrounding astral sand directly formed a silver-white vortex due to the surge of energy. The invisible magic lock energy shield turned into a silver-white vortex because of the astral sand, like an extremely beautiful and dreamy nebula surrounding everyone. The psionic shock waves from the Githyankis seemed to sink directly into the sea. As one of the pinnacle achievements of arcane magic, the magic lock's protective ability was dozens of times stronger than the arcane tower itself. Unfortunately, it consumed too much energy. With the current energy supply of the floating space tower, the magic lock would soon be emptied of the stored arcane energy. Chapter 894. The existence of the magic lock made the Githyankis hesitate for a moment. But there was no way to stop their attack because the Githyankis also understood one thing. That was, at present, no magic lock could operate for too long, and if the magic lock was forcibly activated, it was easy to drain the energy in the elemental pool. The magic lock was originally born from the spell-weaving skills of the High Elves. After the Silver Age, the Ismit period, and the Arcane Empire period, the craftsmanship of the magic lock had gradually become almost perfect, but the larger the magic lock, the greater the consumption. Note: some magic information of the magic lock can be found in Baidu. The magic lock provided more constant magic buffs. Even during the Arcane Empire period, unless it was a floating city controlled by a core arcanist, ordinary floating cities could not use the magic lock to maintain the energy protection force field shield. At present, the magic lock covering the arcane tower provided the following 5 magic buffs: increase resistance, permanent; protection from evil, permanent; blessing, permanent; sharpness, active; and lightness, active. The magic lock was a special domain power. After the perfection of several glorious arcane civilizations, the existence of the magic lock was like a net that was constantly woven by extremely powerful spellcasters to add a variety of functions. At present, the magic lock grafted by the arcane tower was still in a relatively low-level state. It only added 3 permanent magic buffs and 2 large-scale magic buffs that could be activated, and they were basically aimed at demons. If the magic lock of the Arcane Empire period was to be really effective, Gloria and the Fallen, which also needed to incorporate special abilities such as anti-magic force field, as well as large-scale magic buffs that could be activated temporarily. The most powerful magic lock could even allow ordinary people within range to cast spells at will. But this required a lot of energy. The psionic warriors of the Githyankis have begun to land. Gloria's serious voice sounded. As her voice fell, several openings opened in the steel fortress in front, and then a group of thin and slender Githyankis quickly approached. They relied on psionic armor to move directly in the astral plane, and many of their psionic spells could also allow them to perform short and medium-distance teleportation. Intruders detected. Activate the defense system of the arcane tower. Activate the steel golem. Enter battle mode. A cold mechanical voice sounded. As the Githyankis landed inside the floating space tower, a door cracked open at the bottom of the arcane tower. Rows of steel golems in the underground storage room were directly activated, and then they walked to the surface of the floating space tower with heavy steps. The defensive power of an arcane tower naturally couldn't be limited to just a few spells. The golems were a very important part of it. There are quite a lot of enemies. Let's get this over with quickly. Soren thought for a moment and felt that it was better not to dawdle with these Githyanki's. He directly asked the Fallen can the super magic pulse cannon at the top of the arcane tower fire? Just fire at it. Then I will go in and take down the leader of the Githyanki's. The Fallen glanced at Soren and slowly said, sure. However, the reaction of the superconducting Mageforce pulse cannon was huge. I'm worried that we'll alarm these enemies. That was true. The superconducting Mageforce pulse cannon was very powerful, but its movement was also not small. However, the target was so large that there should be no problem in hitting it. Get ready to fire. Soren frowned and thought for a moment, then said in a deep voice, I'll cover. Fire one shot and then pull this astral fortress back. The Fallen immediately responded. Elemental Legion. In just a short while, the Githyanki's had reached hundreds of people. Soren directly summoned the elemental stones that had not been used for a long time. He had never been afraid of the number of enemies. With the raging flames and dull footsteps, a fire elemental elder and an earth elemental elder appeared directly in front of Soren. They were like two walls blocking the path of the Githyanki's. Originally, Soren wanted to summon the legendary Dryad. But for some reason he hesitated when he summoned it and finally decided to give up. If he summoned it, Gloria would definitely ask him in the future. How should he explain this kind of thing? Whether it was the process of obtaining the ability to summon the Dryad or the function of summoning the Dryad, obviously he could not tell Gloria in detail. So Soren simply made more moves. Anyway, as a god he had other summoning abilities. If he was forced into a corner, he might as well summon his demon avatar. Form change, divinity power. A golden light appeared in Soren's eyes, and he directly entered the form of the saint and activated his divine power. Then he waved his hand in front of him, and the land in front of him moved directly. In just a few seconds, it formed an earth wall about 5 meters high. The divinity power of form change could not only be used on himself, but also on anything else that was not divinity. Soren's exploration of the divinity power gradually increased over time. At present, the most important thing was to defend against the enemy's first wave of attack and avoid too much damage to the floating space tower. The steel golem is in position. You can do it now. Gloria's calm voice sounded, and at the same time, an unusually bright light gathered at the top of the arcane tower, pointing directly to the astral fortress in the distance. The steel golems formed a line of defense. With the earth wall created by Soren's divinity power, they directly blocked the advance of all the Githyanki's. At this time, a silver-white streamer also appeared in Soren's palm. His figure directly turned into an afterimage and rushed forward. In the blink of an eye, he killed more than a dozen Githyanki's and approached the steel fortress at the same time. Form change, divinity power. As if they were aware of the existence of Soren, the Githyanki's immediately realized that there was another legendary rogue in the floating space tower. The next moment, there was a fluctuation of psionic transmission near Soren. It seemed that there was a very powerful psionic warlock coming to kill him. In this regard, Soren could not help but have a playful smile at the corner of his mouth. He directly activated the divinity power that changed space and fixed the Githyanki psionic warlock who had just arrived in place. As a mid-level divine power, Sauron was able to deal with these enemies with ease. Form change, divinity power. Shadow, realm. Arcane, realm. Fear, realm. Boom. A dazzling light shot out from the top of the floating space tower and instantly pierced through the steel armor of the astral fortress. At the same time, Soren's figure also rose into the air at this moment. His figure was shrouded in golden light, almost entering the demigod form. He did not activate all the realm powers he had, but only activated the shadow, arcane, and fear. At the same time, he used the ability of the divinity to change reality to block the area with a diameter of 1 kilometer with himself as the center. Since he had already opened fire, then he might as well reveal his true form and let these Githyanki's die a little faster. It also clearly told them that this time they had kicked an iron plate. The characteristics of the saint form were very obvious, because it was almost impossible for mortals to activate so many realm powers and directly distort the surrounding reality at the same time. At the moment when Soren activated the demigod form and rushed forward, the Githyanki's in the steel fortress fell into a panic. This was not only because of the negative status attached by the fear domain, but also because they realized that they seemed to have robbed the head of a saint. Although the Githyanki did not believe in any gods, they knew very well that any gods, even weak ones, were not something they could easily fight against. Teleport. Prepare for teleportation. All spiritualists, follow me to the upper level of the fortress immediately. A hoarse and panicked roar sounded. A Githyanki with a slightly old face rushed toward the upper level of the astral fortress, and there were also some special Githyanki nearby. They were teleportation warlocks. Wanna run? Soren, who had activated the divine form, had sharp senses. His divine perception was almost locked on to all energy fluctuations. He could not help but have a playful smile at the corner of his mouth and slowly said, "You actually think you can run away from me? Naive." Soren's figure turned into a golden figure. With the ripples of divine power, the nearby space was forcibly controlled by him, and all teleportation channels were blocked at the same time. Space change, divinity. Large dimensional anchor. Chapter 895. Soren's figure instantly appeared inside the astral fortress. The pressure belonging to the gods enveloped all the Githyanki. Since the birth of the multiverse, the gods had always been above all things, whether it was the Mind Stealer Empire, the Silver Age, or the Arcane Age. Although the power of mortals could develop to a certain extreme and enter the peak of the multiverse, in the end, it was impossible to truly stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods. As a consequence of the Mind Stealer Empire, although the birth of the Githyanki avoided the gods, they were still mortals after all. Dear Lord of Shadows. We didn't mean to offend your excellency. We didn't know your excellency was here. We didn't know. The leader of the Githyanki appeared in front of Soren. In the face of a mid-level god, especially when the astral fortress had been sealed, he finally gave up resistance and stammered, "We didn't mean to offend you. Please." Before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by Soren. He gently waved his hand, and with the brilliance of magic, a psionic warrior hiding in the corner who tried to sneak attack was killed on the spot. Finger of Death. With Soren's current spellcasting ability, it was almost impossible for mortals to be immune to his instant death spells. The psionic warrior of the Githyanki quickly lost all his life. The power of magic took away his soul, leaving only a pale body. You rob for a living. When you rob others, you should have been prepared to be robbed, right? Soren's attitude was very cold, without the slightest mercy. The other Githyanki suddenly felt a trace of despair after hearing his words. Not everyone dared to challenge a true god. Even Eugene, the divine ascender, had only challenged a lesser demon lord head-on. It was because of Soren that he fought against the Lord of Shadows. Other than that, Eugene had never challenged any god, not even a weak god. Although the Githyanki did not believe in gods, they knew how terrible any true god was. Not to mention Soren, who had mid-level divine power. It was easy to recognize Soren's presence, as the power of the shadows had already enveloped the entire fortress. Now you are all my captives and slaves. Everything you have is my spoils of war. I have the right to decide whether you live or die as I please. Of course. This is also according to your customs, the rules of the astral boundary. Speaking of this, Soren had a playful smile at the corner of his mouth. The Githyanki were a relatively brutal race. Because of their experience of being enslaved by the Mind Flayers, they were also very cruel to other races. Killing and plundering were only part of it. Because of their history of cruel enslavement, the Githyanki liked to use psionic power to control and enslave the minds of other races. They were a group of bandits wandering in the astral world. Soren was the god of the Order faction. Therefore he would not carry out meaningless killing. After the power of the Shadow Priesthood shrouded the entire fortress, he decided to treat them according to the law of the astral boundary and the style of the Githyanki, turning them all into his slaves. Since he was a slave, his life and death were in his hands. You can try to resist. I know you are good at dealing with slaves who resist. But, similarly, I will also deal with those who try to resist in the same way as you. Soren's calm voice spread throughout the fortress, and the battle in the floating space tower had already stopped. The Githyanki did not dare to act rashly, because any of their actions could lead to Soren's merciless slaughter. The evil gods would sometimes reason with them, but those were their reasons and they could only choose to obey or die. Soren would not forgive them. Before the Githyanki launched a plundering attack, they should have been prepared for failure. Mercy was meaningless, and resistance could only bring Soren some killing experience. So, now move the fortress close to the floating island. Soren looked at the Githyanki's leader, who was sweating profusely. As a warlord under the queen, the leader had the power of a high-grade legend, but in the face of Soren's divine pressure, he was like an ordinary person. That was the most fundamental difference between gods and mortals. Soren blocked all teleportation spells with the power of the space-changing divinity, and these Githyankis could not even escape now. If Soren used a group divine power shockwave, the result was likely to be corpses everywhere. The huge astral fortress began to move. Soon Gloria and Fallen which also appeared in the fortress. Gloria's expression was a little shocked at the moment. Although she had long known that Soren's power had surpassed her after he became a god, she was still shocked when she saw him easily suppress a Githyanki's. That was the power of the gods. Even during the most glorious period of the Arcane Empire, the power of the entire arcane civilization was only comparable to the gods. A sense of distance made her feel pressured. When she first met Soren, he was just an inconspicuous thief, but now she had to look up to him. The steel golem began to enter the fortress. Groups of Githyankis were escorted into the floating space tower. There were more than 5,000 Githyankis, and nearly half of them were combatants. The entire Githyankian race was scattered like this. Standing at the highest position was the Githyankian queen, who was close to an undead creature. Below her were many warlord leaders who controlled their respective astral fortresses and constantly plundered other races to live. The leader of the Githyankis watched helplessly as the steel golem escorted his people together like slaves. He wanted to resist Soren, but he knew that it would only bring the destruction of his race. He kept trying to call the allies of the Githyankis, the legendary Red Dragon Covenant, of the mortals. Basically, in any Githyanki's astral fortress, there was at least one adult red dragon as an ally. The astral fortress in front of him had 3 adult red dragons as allies. When they encountered a powerful enemy, the leader could use the power of the covenant to summon them to help, and part of the wealth obtained from plundering would be shared with the evil red dragons. There was no response from the covenant. Even though the leader of the Githyankis kept calling, no red dragon responded to his call. This group of evil and cunning dragons had betrayed the ancient covenant. After discovering that the enemy was a god, and a god with mid-level divine power, none of the 3 red dragons who had signed the covenant chose to help them fight. Because coming over was just a suicide mission. Soren was also waiting. In fact, he had been waiting for the leader of the Githyankis to resist him. This astral fortress was not very big, so the space for a red dragon to move in was very small. This meant that the red dragon covenant of this race existed as a contract, instead of directly raising the red dragon inside. He was waiting for the other party to summon a red dragon. A Githyanki's fortress had a lot of wealth, but if he could kill a dragon along the way, it would naturally be a good thing. There were fewer and fewer dragons in the material plane. Most of the dragons lived in Dragon Island and Dragon Kingdom. Even the gods would easily enter because it was the territory of the dragon god. If the leader of the other party could summon a few red dragons, Soren would be able to make another fortune. Unfortunately, it seemed that the cunning red dragons knew about the existence of Soren. He waited for so long, but he did not see any signs of resistance. The Red Dragon Covenant could not summon allies to help. The leader of the Githyankis gave up resistance because of despair. Soren's plan seemed to have failed. It should be related to him exposing the power of the divine spark too early. These red dragons were all too scared to come. Although these Githyankis were captured, how to deal with them was also a problem. This race was born with psionic power. As slaves, they must be controlled by very powerful creatures such as mind flayers. The high priest should have a way. However, before they were branded as slaves, he was afraid that some shackles to seal their power would be prepared first. Great Shadow Lord. After really confirming that the Red Dragon Covenant had failed, the leader of the Githyankis finally completely gave up the hope of resisting Soren. However, he still didn't want his people to lose their freedom, so he walked to Soren with a bumpy mood and humbly lowered his head and said, "It is our fault to offend you. According to the rules of the astral plane, as losers, we should become your captives. However, I hope to make a deal with your excellency in exchange for the freedom of my people." Soren smiled and said slowly, "You are now my captives and everything in the fortress belongs to me. I'm curious, what else do you have to trade with me?" The leader of the Githyankis said in a deep voice, "Yes. I have another message. I believe your excellency will definitely be interested in it. I hope to use it in exchange for the freedom of my people." Soren raised his eyebrows and said slowly, "What message?" The leader of the Githyanki looked at Soren with a firm gaze and said in a deep voice, "The ancient god's corpse floating in the astral plane. I hope to use a floating ancient god's corpse in exchange for the freedom of my people. We Githyanki have been floating in the astral plane all our lives, and only we know where some ancient god's corpses are. If your excellency is willing to give my people freedom, I am willing to tell your excellency the location of an ancient god's corpse. If your excellency is unwilling, then even if you kill me and torture my soul, you won't be able to get any information. The heart and soul of the Githyanki have been tested by the mind flayers. I believe your excellency should know about an ancient god's corpse and a group of insignificant slaves. Which one is more important?" Chapter 896. The words of the Githyanki leader seemed to have poked Soren's weakness, and he could not help but hesitate. The ancient god's corpse. This was an existence that many people knew about, but they might not have the chance to encounter it. Even during the Avatar crisis, many gods liked to wander in the astral world, but the probability of encountering the ancient god's corpse was much lower than encountering abominations, astral beasts and centimanes. Even the gods did not know where the boundary of the boundless astral world was. Perhaps only those with great divine power could see different things beyond the boundaries of the multiverse. In terms of probability, the Githyanki who had been wandering in the astral world all their lives, had the highest probability of encountering the ancient god's corpse. There was such a passage recorded in the Pantheon. At the beginning of the multiverse, the demons came uninvited. From then on, the war between order and chaos began. The first ancient gods and demons fought in the Pantheon. At that time, the demons of Orbis had not been born, let alone the current demons of Tana-Ri. In the long battle, countless ancient demons died, but there were also the first ancient gods of order who fell, and their corpses stayed in the astral world. After thousands of years, they did not decay and disappear, but they were shrouded in a special power that floated in the astral world forever. Do you really know where the ancient god's corpse is? Soren frowned and stared at the Githyanki leader in front of him. For him, the value of the ancient god's corpse was indeed much higher than that of a group of slaves. If the other party really knew where the ancient god's corpse was, then it was not a big deal to give them freedom. Yes. The Githyanki leader nodded and said in a deep voice, "I swear in the name of the silver blade of Githyanki." It seemed to be true. When the other party spoke, Soren cast a spell to detect lies. This was a very simple choice. Soren quickly made a decision and said, "Okay. As long as you tell me where the ancient god's corpse is, I will give you freedom." As a god of the Order camp, Soren's promise was more important than that of other gods. However, the Githyanki leader was still very careful. He said cautiously, "It's not that I don't believe you, but this is related to the safety of the entire clan. I still hope that you can draft a contract." It seemed like he was a guy who knew the market. He knew that negotiating with an evil god was like signing a contract with a devil. Such a contract was obviously much more effective than an oral oath. Soren didn't have any questions. With a wave of his hand, he drew up a contract and handed it to the other party. "Take a look. If there's no problem, then leave your spiritual imprint." The leader of the Githyanki carefully looked at it several times before carefully leaving a spiritual imprint. Then he used telepathy to tell Soren a location. It was a special place. It was very close to the Clockwork Nirvana's mechanical mirror, located in a special area near the Order space. Respected Lord of Shadows. After the leader of the Githyanki told Soren the location of the ancient god's corpse, he carefully looked at his face and slowly said, "I have now told you the location of the ancient god's corpse, so can you let us go now?" Soren looked up at him and waved his hand to let the golems give the Githyanki their freedom. However, just when the leader of the Githyanki was about to return to the astral stronghold, Soren frowned and said in a deep voice, "Wait a minute. I only promised to give you freedom. I didn't promise to return the spoils that belong to me to you." Having said that, Soren stretched out his hand and spread out the contract in his palm. There was a smile at the corner of his mouth. He looked like a cunning devil and slowly said, "There is no such clause in the contract." The leader of the Githyanki's expression suddenly became stiff. Yes. He was thinking about how to let his people escape this disaster, but he didn't expect that according to the rules of the astral boundary, all the wealth of his clan would be Soren's spoils of war, and his request was only to give his people freedom. The contract only stated that Soren could not turn them into slaves and set them free, but there was no indication that he needed to return the astral stronghold to them. Damn evil god. Damn devil. Although he wanted to fight Soren to the death, the leader of the Githyanki's took a deep breath and tried to endure all this. He lowered his head and said, "Great Shadow Lord. Without the astral stronghold, we can only become refugees in the astral boundary. Even if the master has freedom, there is no way to survive. Without the astral stronghold, this clan would be finished." The astral stronghold was equivalent to an independent half-bit wall. The birth of each astral stronghold required the high-grade legendary psionic warlocks of the Githyanki's to use Genesis to open up a half-bit wall, and then slowly turn it into an astral stronghold. Without the astral stronghold, his people would lose their foundation. The warlord leader would also become a refugee, and the freedom he had just gained would be meaningless. The devil's trick. Everything Soren did was just a means used by the devils. As an orderly evil god, it was natural for him to use some of the evil means of the devils. Moreover, he didn't violate his contract at all. He had done everything that was said in the contract. As for these Githyanki's who couldn't even leave after losing the astral stronghold, that was not something he needed to care about. However, the leader of the Githyanki's in front of him was obviously a flexible guy. He immediately lowered his head humbly and said, "I don't know what we need to do for your excellency to return the astral stronghold to us." A smile appeared at the corner of Soren's mouth. He liked to deal with smart people, especially smart people who were sensible, so he slowly said, "This astral stronghold belongs to me. But such a big astral stronghold obviously takes up a lot of space. I think it would be a good thing if we could sell it as soon as possible." Sell it? When the leader of the Githyanki's heard this, his face suddenly twitched. He felt his heart ache, but he still gritted his teeth and said, "If that's the case, Your Excellency might as well sell this astral stronghold back to us." He took the bait. Regardless of whether the other party was willing or not, this was what Soren wanted, so he pretended to be surprised and said, "You? Although I have promised to give you freedom. But you have just been my captives and you have no money. If it weren't for my mercy, you wouldn't have left anything valuable on you. I'm curious, what did you use to buy such a valuable astral stronghold? I think maybe we should find another buyer of the Githyanki's. Maybe they will be willing to pay a high price." Next to him, Gloria had been silently watching everything in front of her, and Fallen, which also looked at Soren curiously. It was not until this moment that the two legendary witches knew the real purpose of Soren. When they heard this, they couldn't help but open their mouths in surprise, and then a playful smile appeared at the corner of their mouths. Because Soren was really bad. Wasn't it obvious that he had dug a huge pit and waited for the leader of the Githyanki's to jump into it? This was obviously a trap. Furthermore, it was an unprecedentedly huge pit. But knowing that this was a super huge trap, the leader of the Githyanki's still jumped into it without hesitation, because if he didn't jump he would lose everything. The anger of his people alone was enough to tear him apart. "I'll buy it." The leader of the Githyanki's gritted his teeth and said, "Although we don't have any wealth now, but just give us some time, we can buy it." Contract. I hope Your Excellency can give us a contract on credit. As long as Your Excellency can return the astral stronghold to us first. No matter how much it costs, we will slowly return it to Your Excellency. Soren finally showed a smile and said lightly, "I am a kind person. Since you are so sincere, then it's not impossible for us to talk about it. If you only use gold to pay for the astral stronghold, then it's obviously very difficult. But I am a very kind god. So I can accept your payment in various ways such as diamonds, weapons, equipment, minerals, soul crystals, rare materials and so on. Now, let's assess the value of this astral stronghold first, and then we can slowly finalize the contract," Soren said with a smile, and his voice became much more cordial. However, the leader of the Githyanki's in front of him looked as if he was facing a great enemy, because he knew that the whole clan was going to be cheated. For a long time in the future, he was afraid that he would have to work for the evil god in front of him for free to pay the ransom of the astral stronghold. But at this time he couldn't care so much. Anyway, the ransom was paid by the whole clan. As long as he could keep his position as the leader, it would be fine. As for Gloria and Fallen, which next to him, their eyes became brighter and brighter as they listened. In the end they couldn't help but laugh. If they could have a Githyanki's clan to serve them and collect all kinds of rare materials, then their future research work would be much easier. Today this group of Githyanki's came to rob, but they didn't expect that after Soren's means, they would become children of wealth who came to give them a big gift. Now, They finally knew why the city of Mordor could rise so quickly in the hands of Sauron. Such means he was as cunning as the devil. However, at this moment the more they looked at Sauron, the happier they felt. An evil god of the lawful evil camp didn't need any reason to cheat people. The two legendary witches felt that this approach was in line with Sauron's identity. Even the Githyankis felt that there was nothing wrong because the other party was a powerful evil god. He just fell into the evil god's trap because he was too careless. The good thing about the evil gods was that they would never be bound and kidnapped by morality. P.S. If you write for too long you will get tired. You can't write anything on the computer. But after resting for a while, you will feel uncomfortable if you don't write something. Announce a reader group, Sauron's Stronghold, Mordor City 181397040. You can catch me in it. Please bring your own master pokeball. Chapter 897. That was the reality. As an evil god, Sauron didn't hesitate to cheat the leader of the Githyankis, but as the leader of the Githyankis, he also didn't hesitate to cheat his own people. After Sauron ordered the steel golems to gather the captives of the Githyankis, the leader of the Githyankis, named Karnast, didn't hesitate to sell all his people. According to the contract he signed with Sauron, he couldn't mention anything about the ancient god's corpse. Otherwise he would violate the contract and be punished by Sauron. So, in the mouth of the cunning Githyanki's warlord named Karnast, he became a great hero who saved his people. Because he accidentally angered a terrible evil god, the entire Githyankis became lowly captives. And at this time their brave leader stood up. Not only did he dare to face the terrible evil god Sauron, but he also dared to bargain with him. In the end he relied on his glib tongue to persuade the terrible evil god. He made him agree to give all the Githyankis freedom in exchange for enough offerings and ransom in the future to satisfy his greedy and endless desires. Sauron temporarily left after releasing these Githyankis. The whole venue was given to Karnast to perform. This guy's acting skills were definitely at the level of a movie king, and his ability to deceive and coax was also first class. He forcibly distorted the whole process. He changed himself from a stupid leader who made a wrong judgment and caused his people to provoke Sauron to a wise, brave, and decisive person. When the whole race was close to destruction, he relied on his own strength to persuade the terrible evil god. He negotiated with the evil god with enough rewards in the future and finally persuaded him to give everyone freedom, and even took back their astral fortress from the evil god. Of course. As for how terrible the debt the whole race owed, the clever Karnast only mentioned it a little. Anyway, it was just that bad. If it really didn't work, they had 10, 20, 30, or 50 years to pay it back. The Githyankis relied on plundering for a living, and there were many valuable mineral wealth in the astral world. With the power of a race, they could always pay off the debt owed to the evil god. No matter what. Karnast, the leader of the Githyankis, used his own means to maintain his position, and at the same time, his reversal of the situation inadvertently increased his reputation. Sauron had no objections to this. He only wanted benefits that he could see. As for what Karnast used to confuse his clansmen, that wasn't something he should ask. Since the contract had been completed. Now it was time to fulfill his promise. Sauron commanded the steel golem to enter the treasure vault of the Githyankis, and then moved out all the valuable things inside. According to Karnast, this wealth was used in exchange for their freedom. As for the debt, it was the ransom for the astral fortress. Sauron was a very kind guy, so he only took away gold, minerals, rare materials, and all kinds of things that Gloria and Fallen Witch liked. He did not completely empty the Githyanki's house, at least he left them enough food and weapons. The preliminary estimate is about 8 million Kindler. Gloria's appraisal ability was excellent. She quickly calculated it and said to Sauron, "The Githyankis have hoarded a lot of metal minerals, which should be enough for us to make more than 500 steel golems. The value of the soul crystals can't be calculated, but there are more than 300 of them. As for some other things, I'm afraid we have to go back and appraise them before we can determine their specific value." Sauron nodded to show that he understood. These were actually small amounts of money. The debt of 36 million Kindler that the Githyankis owed was the real amazing gain this time. The astral fortress was equivalent to an independent half-bit wall. Sauron calculated it according to the price of a small kingdom. Even if he gave the other party a discount, the debt owed in the end was still as high as 36 million Kindler. This was a debt that was neither too much nor too little. If it was too much, the other party would feel that it was impossible to pay it back, so it was easy for some accidents to happen. But this price, according to the calculation of the Githyanki's, was at most the harvest of the tribe for 10 or 20 years. If they were lucky enough to find the diamond meteor of the astral world or rob a very rich guy, then they could pay it back in 5 or 10 years. With the endless wealth of the astral world and the ability of the Githyanki's to plunder and harvest, it was no problem to get 1 or 2 million Kindler worth of things a year. If it weren't for so many precious resources in the astral world, the Arcane Empire wouldn't be so obsessed with exploring the astral world. The whole process of the handover was very smooth. Soren moved everything he wanted, and the Githyanki's took back their astral fortress. In any case, the tribe was finally maintained. After Karnas temporarily escaped from Soren's hands, he immediately prepared to teleport away with his people. He really didn't want to see this evil god again. At least, that was the case until the next installment payment was made according to the contract. He was now ready to take his people to the lower plane. In order to repay the huge debt owed to Soren, he had to do a few more business without any capital. As for the debt, it was still impossible. Soren had left a mark. For a mid-level evil god, no mortal could escape his debt. As long as he wanted to find the other party, it would be useless even if these Githyanki's fled to the ends of the earth. Looking at the Githyanki's fleeing in panic, Gloria finally couldn't help laughing. Fallen, which also smiled as if she was in a very good mood at the moment. She said, "I didn't expect the harvest of this trip to the astral world to be so great. It seems that we have to come a few more times in the future." Soren also smiled and said in a deep voice, "It's impossible to be so lucky every time." This time the Githyanki's came to our door. The probability of encountering other creatures in the vast astral world is not high. If we encounter a wandering astral world beast, I'm afraid we can only fight. A large number of materials were piled up in the storage room of the arcane tower. With such a great harvest this time, there was naturally no need to continue to collect the astral sand. The Githyanki's also stored this silver-white substance, and the weapons they forged were also mixed with the astral sand. Gloria began to activate the arcane tower to lock the coordinates, while Fallen, which activated the elemental furnace to prepare for teleportation. With such a large number of materials, their next research could last for a long time. As for Soren, his attention turned to another aspect. Clock's Nirvana mechanical mirror? He couldn't help but fall into deep thought and murmured, "A dangerous area that only high-level legends can set foot in. I didn't expect the ancient god's corpse to be in such a place. It's a bit troublesome." Things had to be done step by step. There were a lot of things to prepare to explore the Nirvana mechanical mirror. After all, this place was famous for having as many legends as dogs. Chapter 898. Outer Islands, Mordor City. When the floating space tower returned to Mordor City, it attracted a large number of citizens. As a resident of Mordor City, one must have a strong enough heart and the ability to accept all kinds of new things. The sudden disappearance of the floating space tower attracted the curiosity of many citizens, and when the floating space tower returned, many people came to watch. Recently, the changes in Mordor City were too great. It could be said that it was changing with each passing day. The lighthouse in the port area recently had some airships attached to huge balloons. For the residents of Mordor City, they would not be surprised if the whole city flew into the sky one day. Well, the guide to life in Mordor City had already told them to learn to be used to new things. The Githyanki's inventory was very rich. Gloria and Fallen, which needed some time to sort it out, and Soren also needed to conduct a second study of the war chest bitwall, which was a large-scale killing trial. If this thing could be popularized, Soren's current power of faith could increase by about 30%, and if it could be popularized on a larger scale in the future, then Soren's harvest would be very terrifying. It could be said, no god could recover divine power value as fast as Soren. Even after the end of the Avatar crisis, other gods could hardly compare with Soren's speed of accumulating divine power. Even after the end of the Avatar crisis, divine power value would not appear out of thin air. The gods were close to invincible in the kingdom of God because there were thousands of years of accumulation of divine power in the kingdom of God. If Soren succeeded, there would be a steady stream of power to build the kingdom of God in the future, and he could transform the kingdom of God into the ideal kingdom he needed. The second test began 2 days later. Soren changed the mode this time. He no longer competed with the demons in Mordor City, but changed to another map. In a boundless blood-red wilderness. Huge steel fortresses could be seen in the distance, and on the other side was an endless stretch of tents. At first glance it was a dense crowd of people. No matter who appeared here for the first time, they would feel small and powerless because whether it was the creatures in front of them or the atmosphere of the whole environment, it made people feel a trace of depression and madness. This was the 10,000 Abyss Plains. It was also the first battlefield of the endless bloody war. A team of Mordor City officers appeared on the side of the steel fortress. The leader was a drow instructor, and the others were rangers, lurkers, priests, part-time warriors, and monks. Perhaps it was because his reputation had spread to the eastern countries. Soren also had some monks under his command, and some of them even entered the officer class of Mordor City. Lord Terence. Is this the trial that Sir Soren prepared for us? It doesn't look easy. The first to speak was the lurker. He looked around and muttered, "This place feels weird. It's depressing." A dense fog enveloped the entire battlefield. They could only vaguely see everything in the distance, but they couldn't see clearly what it was. The drow instructor named Terence had a solemn expression on his face. He looked at the steel fortress behind him and murmured, "The scene here seems a little familiar, as if I've seen it in a book. We don't seem to be in the material plane, but have been sent to the lower planes." The ground was blood-red. Bones that had existed for a long time could be seen everywhere. It was a huge and cruel battlefield at first glance. They didn't know how long the war lasted for the earth to be blood-red. "This seems to be the plane of 10,000 Abyss." The one who spoke was the only priest among them. Spellcasters were obviously more knowledgeable. He looked around and said solemnly, "If I'm not wrong, we're now in the 10,000 Abyss plane of the bottomless abyss." Plane of 10,000 Abyss? The first layer of the abyss? Bloody war. Hearing the priest's words, the faces of the others present changed drastically. Then one of them said with a trembling voice, "Endless bloody war? Oh my God. We've been sent to a bloody battlefield?" The priest shook his head and said, "This should be a trial, not a real bloody battlefield. Otherwise we would have died long ago." As if in response to his words, the fog in the surroundings gradually dissipated. Behind them, a well-equipped army of demons appeared. Countless demons also emerged from the tents in front of them, stretching as far as the eye could see. "The 5 of you come with me." At this moment, a burly bone devil appeared in front of them. Facing the 5 of them, he smiled a little disdainfully and said, "I really don't know why the mercenaries sent this time are so weak. The 5 of you together aren't even enough to fill the gap between the teeth of a soul judgment demon. Let's go. Follow me over there. I hope the 5 of you can survive this battle." After he finished speaking, the burly bone demon walked to the other side. The 5 people present seemed to have understood something. They looked at each other and quickly followed him. They were arranged to be bloody war mercenaries in the trial. Moreover, they were arranged to be in the demon camp. The bone devil in front of them was one of the members of the demon army that they joined. So they had already guessed the content of the trial. At the same time, on the other side of the rift plane, a similar scene was happening. However, the people who were teleported here were a little special. Compared to the officers of Motor City, they were more unruly. However, their individual strength was stronger. Because these people were all high-ranking pirates under Soren. Not all pirates were suitable for training into an army. Some pirates could only do their old jobs. And Soren also needed some of these underlings. Damn. There are so many demons. Compared to the officers, the collective quality of the pirates had obviously declined a lot. After the fog dissipated, these pirates were shocked when they saw the demon army nearby. However, the pirates who could survive and reach the top were all very smart and cunning. Under the guidance of a cunning demon, they quickly figured out the whole story and understood that they were now on the side of the demons in the Abyss Bloody War. What they were about to face next was a small-scale skirmish. The left wing of the demon army would launch a surprise attack on the steel fortress of the demon army. And as the bloody war mercenaries, they would join this surprise attack. As for whether they could survive in the end, it would depend on their luck. P.S. 5 vs 5 Bloody War. The foreshadowing in the war chess plane can finally be filled. Chapter 899. Soren looked down at everything from the sky. As the ruler of the battle flag plane, Soren had created 2 battle flag trials. The difficulty was much easier than the one he encountered at the beginning. He generally used the experience of the battle games in his previous life to set it as a battle mode trial scene. The first one was the battle between Mordor City and the demon army, which was used in the first test. This battle flag trials had some limitations, So Soren created today's new trial mode, which was the Endless Abyss Bloody Trial. There was a reason for choosing the Bloody Trial. Because it was something that all professions knew, and it was easy to form a sense of immersion after being sent to the Bloody Trial. The cruel environment would oppress one's own potential. Besides, Soren still needed to do an important test. That was, if the trial was killed by the storyline character, would the killing power be the same as if the trial was killed by the trial? Soren himself had participated in the Abyss Bloody Trial. So the entire Battle Flag trials was very realistic, and even the terrain was similar to the first layer of the Abyss. This was because Soren simulated all of this based on the bloody battle that his demon avatar had encountered at the beginning. In terms of setting, it was still a small-scale battle because the number of trial participants was still too small. It was not worth Soren spending too much effort to expand the scale of the trial. However, even if it was a small-scale battle, under the scale of the Abyss Bloody Trial, it was enough to easily destroy a small kingdom in a material plane. The number of troops on both sides added up to more than 10,000 people. The identity of the trial participants was unified as mercenaries. There were no racial restrictions to becoming a bloody trial mercenary. Even the demons had become a mercenary on the demon side. With the bloody trial mercenary to strengthen the sense of immersion of the trial participants, Soren needed a real battle to make up for the amount of killing power that the Battle Flag plane could provide. Battle Flag plane 10,000 Abyss plane. From the initial shock to the current adaptation, Terrence had gradually become accustomed to the pressure brought by the demons. As an excellent drow instructor, his own qualities were obviously higher than others. Because of his survival experience in the Underdark, he had also mastered a little way to deal with demons. Now that he had become the leader of a small team of devils, he had some cannon fodder even though his subordinates were all inferior demons. At the same time, on the other side, the trial challengers who were mainly elite pirates had encountered some trouble. The reason was that one of the high-grade pirates had cursed at the demon. Demons were creatures. You all know what I mean. As the representative creatures of the chaotic evil alignment, there was never a shortage of hot-tempered demons among the demons. Therefore, this elite pirate was unsurprisingly attacked by a berserk demon. Before the battle began, they had already received an attack from their allies. What was even more speechless was that the demon captain did not have any intention of stopping it. Instead, he watched with interest as the berserk demon attacked them. What kind of bullshit army is this? Old Shark, who was obviously the strongest among the elite pirates, cursed. He then pulled out his weapon and said in a deep voice, "What are you looking at? Are we just going to let him kill the seahorse? Motherf asterisk cur. So what if you're a demon?" The pirates of Mordor were also a group of hot-tempered people. They had followed Soren through countless battles. Although they were still a little weaker than demons, they were not so weak that they did not even have the courage to fight back when attacked by the other party. A group of pirates surrounded the berserk demon and started to fight. The battle didn't last too long. Even when the berserk demon was killed, the demon captain didn't seem to have any intention of stopping them. After they stopped, the demon captain walked over with a strange smile and said in a deep voice, "Your strength is passable. Although you are not as good as the demon mercenaries, you can still bring a little trouble to the demons. Come. Drag this down and give it to the dretches." Ahezru carried the demon's body with one hand and threw it directly to the dretches behind him. Then the dretches swarmed up. The scene was very bloody. Several elite pirates raised their eyebrows when they saw this. They were all people with blood on their hands, but this kind of scene was still rare. They also had a little more real understanding of the ferocity of demons. "You five. I'll give you a small team of dretches. Your task is to go through the trench from here and snipe the demon's mercenaries." As the captain, the Vrock seemed to be in a good mood. He said in a deep voice, "As long as you can kill the demon's mercenaries, you will have completed the mission." The scene quickly changed. According to the specific trajectory, both sides triggered the core mission of the trial. Although no one triggered the hidden mission, which made Soren a little disappointed, this was also a very normal thing. After all, the trial participants were natives, and it was difficult for them to have the various ideas of the adventurers in his previous life. The next thing was very simple. About 10 minutes later, the devil's mercenaries and the demon's mercenaries encountered each other. The battle broke out. The elite pirates, led by the Old Shark, were obviously stronger individually, while the officer class, led by the drows, had more organizational ability. The two sides kept fighting back and forth. Although the officers were more experienced, the old pirates were cunning and had some special tactics, so the two sides were evenly matched. When all the demons and devils that served as cannon fodder were exhausted, they had no choice but to join the battle themselves. At this time, Soren couldn't help but focus his attention. Casualties quickly appeared. The first to die was a pirate with a big beard. He died in the hands of the drows, and the moment he died, a very strong killing intent surged out. This killing force was almost twice as strong as the one Soren absorbed last time. It was almost equivalent to a devout believer's prayers for a whole day. There was no doubt about it. When a trial participant died in the hands of demons and demons, the killing force produced was completely different from when they died in the hands of the same trial participant. The difference between the two sides was very obvious. I see. Dying in the hands of other trial participants is the most valuable thing? Soren looked down at everything below and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. The battle continued and the killing force continued to accumulate. However, just when Soren thought that everything was over, suddenly a very strong killing force emerged, followed by a soul light that directly flew toward Soren's palm. At the same time, on the high platform of the battle flag plain, the 5 elite pirates who seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep suddenly turned pale, and then his breathing became weaker and weaker, and finally his heartbeat stopped. He was dead. When he died in the battle flag trial, he also stopped breathing and heartbeat in reality. Chapter 900. This was an accident. Even Soren didn't expect this accident, because according to his evaluation of the battle flag trial, the professions above intermediate and advanced would not die in reality because of death in the trial. But the accident eventually happened. The dead elite pirate had stopped breathing and heartbeat, and Soren also took his soul in his hand. There was a drawback to the battle flag trial. Because it was a real illusion, all those who died in the trial must go through a mandatory test of death when exiting. If their will was not enough, the trial taker may die in reality while dying in the illusion. Obviously, this elite pirate did not pass the test of death. The accident had already happened. Soren had no choice but to send these trial takers out first. As for the aftermath, he already had a plan because he had already thought about what to do if an accident happened. Steel golems appeared one by one. Trial completed. Please leave here with me. The leader of the steel golems spoke to these pirates with a cold mechanical voice. These pirates had just experienced a real death and they were very tired. Although they found that there seemed to be one person missing, only one of them said, "Where is Swordfish? Why is he missing?" The steel golem said, "He has completed the trial and was sent elsewhere. Now I will escort you out of here." Hearing the words of the steel golem, the other pirates hesitated for a moment and then left. These pirates were randomly selected, and their relationship with each other was not very good. They didn't know what happened, and even if one person was missing, they didn't care too much. Because the death they had just experienced made them realize a lot. On the other side, the arrangement was much easier. All the officers of Mordor City returned to the barracks. At this time, Soren also came to the body of the dead pirate. There were no wounds on the body, and the expression on the deceased's face was quite frightened. In short, in fact, he was scared to death. With the ability of advanced professions, they could completely bear the side effects of the trial failure, but if they believed that they were really dead at that moment, then the final result would be that their body died in reality. I need to think of a way to deal with this. Soren thought for a moment. He waved his hand and carved a complicated rune on the device connected to the battle flag trial. He murmured, "An enchantment circle that strengthens the will? The instant the trial taker exits, it will strengthen their immunity. This should reduce the probability of accidents, right?" The formation was quickly completed. After completing the enchantment, he couldn't help but stare blankly because this enchantment looked a little familiar. Where have I seen it? Suddenly, Soren seemed to have thought of something. His whole body froze on the spot. After a long time, he let out a sigh and left. News of the battle flag trial did not spread. On the contrary, its benefits were spread among the higher-ups of Mordor City. Because one of the trial takers, Jack, had quickly broken through the original bottleneck after a battle of death, and became a professional very close to the legendary realm in Mordor City. The battle flag trial had a clear effect on the professionals, especially the warriors at the front lines. Facing death was something that every warrior had to experience. In reality, such an experience may not be able to survive in the end. The desperate death provided by the battle flag trial gave the warriors a chance to accumulate anger. The breakthrough between life and death directly allowed Jack to master the ability close to the legendary level. The trial must continue. A little bit of casualties is still bearable, compared with the results brought by the battle flag trial. Soren sat in the study and thought about everything. All the people who had been through the battle flag trial were under his observation. Almost every trial taker would have a period of weakness after completing it, but after the period of weakness, their strength had improved significantly. Almost all the trial takers had a small improvement. In this way, an accidental death of a trial taker was not so important. Soren was not overly kind and compassionate. The second wave of the Avatar crisis could break out at any time, and no one knew how many people would die in the third and fourth waves. In the end, only a few people would survive. It was worth it to take a little risk now in exchange for future survival. Mordor City. The port area. Accompanied by a series of muffled rumbles, a giant airship slowly docked near the harbor's lighthouse. Although the number of airships had reached double digits now, every return would still attract people's attention. This airship had just returned from Arendelle. Relying on advanced alchemy technology, it only took a day and a half for the airship to go back and forth between Arendelle and Mordor City. It flew in a straight line in the sky. Such high efficiency instantly made many people realize the business opportunities in it. Even other chambers of commerce were trying to imitate the structure of the airship. Soren was not surprised by this. As long as he controlled the core technology of the floating ring, he could firmly hold on to the interest in it. The Great Temple. A rogue covered in a cloak hurriedly entered the back of the temple and knelt down on one knee in front of a man who was meditating. "Your Excellency High Priest, we have found the traces of the Maiden of Pain. She and her believers appeared in Talon City. The nobles of this city have been infiltrated and corrupted by them. Many people in power have been secretly controlled by them." The High Priest raised his head and said slowly, "Have you finally found her?" "I'm telling my lord now." Send people to secretly monitor the movements of their church, but don't miss any important information. The rogue replied, "Yes." The next moment, the High Priest appeared in Soren's study. For the sudden arrival of the High Priest, Soren raised his head in confusion and said, "Is there anything important?" "My lord." The High Priest bowed and said, "We have found the traces of the Maiden of Pain, Lorita. She and her church are hidden in Talon City." Finally found. Soren was delighted when he heard this and then said in a deep voice, "Keep an eye on them. I'm sending people to the continent now. It's time for a hunt." Soren had been looking for the Maiden of Pain for some time. This evil goddess was very cautious. Even though Soren controlled a large number of rogues, he only found important clues now. Soren thought for a moment and said, "Let's not alert the enemy first. I'll personally head to Talon City tomorrow and send someone to deliver the news to the Princess Royal of Arendelle. The Maiden of Pain and the Maiden of Winter are allies. I'm sure she'll be interested in eliminating the enemy's ally." Chapter 901. A quiet night breeze blew through the garden. In a magnificent hall, a strange sound could be heard faintly. It seemed to be a suppressed and painful groan, but it also seemed to be a whisper of joy. In this strange sound there were also some sharp sounds like slapping. There were two heavily armed guards outside the door, but they were obviously a little absent-minded at the moment. Occasionally they would peek into the hall secretly. When a rather scantily dressed maid came out with a plate, the guards even reached out and touched the maid's buttocks with a smile. The scantily dressed maids were not angry that they were taken advantage of. Instead, they smiled at the guards and then walked quickly to the kitchen. The host and guests inside should be finished soon. They must prepare some snacks and food. After all, it was quite tiring to play with the waiters inside. In the shadows not far away, the ugly monkey silently watched everything in front of him. Next to him was another half-elf. There was a scar on one of his eyebrows, which completely destroyed the half-elf's delicate appearance and added a bit of fierceness. These nobles are quite good at playing. Nothing in the hall could escape their eyes. The half-elf lowered his voice and said, "A high priest, 3 presiding priest attendants, a high-grade knight, and a few others are not up to standard. Shall we do it now?" The ugly monkey glanced at him and whispered, "Wait a little longer. The goddess of abuse, Lorita, is just a god who can't be seen in public. All she does is play with people's hearts. Let's wait until their ceremony is over." Speaking of this, the ugly monkey could not help but curl his lips in disdain. He really looked down on Lorita, the Maiden of Pain, because he had been lurking in Talon City all this time. These believers and priests of the Maiden of Pain played these shameful games all day long, as if they were all masochists. The ceremony inside was about to end. The gorgeous priests were casting magic to heal the wounds of the nobles who were holding the ceremony. Of course, there were also some beautiful girls inside. Some were kneeling under these nobles. As for what they were doing, it was needless to say. As a god that was also active in the Underdark, the Church of the Maiden of Pain had many means to attract these nobles. After a period of observation, Ugly Monkey had figured out the form and method of Lorita's church. Lorita was also an evil god, but she told Ugly Monkey that nothing she did could compare to the Lord he believed in. In conclusion, the way Lorita's church operated was like this: corrupt the nobles, then take them to play the depraved play ritual. Corrupt the merchants, then take them to play the depraved play ritual. Corrupt the civilians, then take them to play the depraved POA ritual. The only difference was the method of corruption and the scale of the various sadistic rituals. Nearly 70% of the nobles in Talon City had been corrupted by the Church of the Maiden of Pain. As an evil god who was good at manipulating people's hearts, Lavita's priests were very good at cultivating the servility of mortals. In addition, there were many beautiful women in the church, so both the abuser and the abused could be satisfied in their hands. Once the soul was corrupted and fell into the abyss of desire, it would not be easy to get out. The whole Talon City was so depraved. From the officials to the civilians, almost all professions had fallen into the control of Lavita's church. They were all evil gods, but sometimes the gap was so big. Unlike what Soren did in Mordor City, Lauvita had been immersed in the joy of the priesthood itself. She liked to abuse people, whether it was physically or mentally, and enjoyed the process of others being abused. It was almost time. When the beautiful half-elf priestess pulled back her whip and was about to cast healing spells on the nobles who had just experienced pain and pleasure, the Ugly Monkey and the other half-elf also made their move. Do it. As his cold voice fell, Ugly Monkey's figure disappeared from where he stood. The next moment he appeared behind the guards in the hall. With a silent flash of cold light, one of the guards died in his hands. The other half-elf also moved quickly, and the two of them cooperated well to kill the two guards at the door. Shadow Jump. After taking over the priesthood of Shadow, Soren's divine power began to give more special abilities to his believers, especially the extension ability in the Shadow realm, which greatly increased the strength of many rogues under his command. Ugly Monkey's target was the priest. As a spellcaster, when Ugly Monkey sneaked behind her, the fate of Lauvita was already decided. No mercy. Ugly Monkey pierced her heart with a dagger without any mercy. At this time, the nobles who had just recovered from the joy and pain let out a scream of horror. There were one or two naked ladies who directly screamed and fainted after seeing the blood spurting out from the priest's chest. The killing did not stop. Ugly Monkey was still harvesting lives. He suddenly felt like laughing when he saw the nobles, who were usually high and mighty, trembling in fear. Without the coat of power, these guys are really disappointing. The whole process was very fast. When Ugly Monkey stopped, the hall was already full of corpses. At this time, the guards outside also reacted, and there were hurried footsteps in the distance. Let's go. Without any hesitation, Ugly Monkey disappeared, and the other half-elf also disappeared quickly. This night, Talon City was very restless. This was because this was not the only place where the attack took place. Tonight, at least 10 places in Talon City had similar assassinations. The targets were almost all the influential people in the city, and almost all of them had priests from the Lauvita church present. Soren had already made his move. Before dealing with the Maiden of Pain, the members of the church under his command had already launched an attack on the opposing church. A large number of assassins had cut off Lorita's wings with cold means, and at the same time, they had severely damaged the noble forces that they had corrupted and controlled. This meant that the secular forces of Talon City would be deterred. Those nobles had to weigh their own heads before thinking about whether to get involved in the struggle between the two churches. However, everything had just begun. The Church of Abuse had spent a lot of effort to corrupt the city. Many of the guards and army had been secretly controlled by them. Although Soren's church was stronger, it was not easy for a strong dragon to suppress a snake in its own territory. In order to completely destroy Lauvita's power, he had to use a more powerful method. P.S. There is one more update. Chapter 902. Talon City. In a dark temple, a group of scantily clad women gathered near the altar. Madame Dini. A dark-skinned, gorgeous woman hurriedly walked in from outside the temple and said in a hurry, "Trina is dead. She was attacked by a group of rogues when she was passing through the alley at the bottom of the lake. All the people accompanying her were killed. When we rushed over, only corpses were left on the ground." As soon as her voice fell, the women near the altar were horrified. They then looked at each other and didn't know what to do. Many of these women had dark skin, but most of them were gorgeous. They were not humans but half-elves of drows and humans. The belief of the Maiden of Pain was also spread in the Underdark. As one of the most feminist gods, she also had a small number of believers in the Underdark. Because all the high-ranking people in the church were women, the same as Lorcy the Spider, a small number of female drows as well as some mixed-blood drows were the high-ranking priests in her church. These mixed-blood drows were currently responsible for corrupting Talon City. Have you tracked down the assassins? The woman named Dini was a charming half-elf, but judging from her skin color, she didn't seem to be a mixed-blood drow. No. The woman who came in shook her head. Dini couldn't help but show a wry smile when she heard that. She waved her hand and closed the door. Then she looked at the others with a serious expression and said, "Sisters, the situation is very critical now. The true god, Soren, who is in charge of shadows, rogues, half-elves, theft and tracking, has launched an attack on our church. With the strength of our church, it's difficult to resist. And the God we serve has yet to show up. If this continues, I'm afraid everyone here will die in the hands of those assassins. The enemy has too many rogues and assassins. They are everywhere. Too many of our sisters have left us during this period of time. At this time, we have to make a choice." Hearing the words of the female priest named Dini, the other women present were puzzled. Some of the smarter women were frightened. "I think some of you have already noticed." Dini waved her hand gently, and a strange shadow that looked like a blurry human figure appeared in the dark. She said slowly, "The sisters that I've invited this time are all half-elves. Lauvita, whom we once served, can't possibly defeat the powerful Sir Soren. She has already abandoned us. At a time like this, we can only save ourselves. I've already chosen to serve the great Soren. He is the protector of the half-elves. The benevolent him is willing to accept us half-elves. As long as you change your faith and serve him sincerely, you can keep your current status and identity." As soon as he finished speaking, a sharp whistling sound suddenly came from the air, followed by a vicious snake-headed whip lashing at Dini. At the same time, a furious and sharp female voice rang out, "Damn traitor! How dare you betray the faith of our Lord? Lauvita will not fail. You traitors will all die in torture." There was no shortage of fanatics in any church. Dini was not surprised by the sudden attack. She also waved her hand and threw out a long whip, then her figure retreated. At this time, the assassins who were lurking in the shadows also moved. Accompanied by cold light, 3 rogues rushed toward the attacking drow at the same time. The next moment, blood splashed and the fanatic of Lauvita died instantly. The strong smell of blood filled the air. Everyone's mood sank to the bottom because they realized that if they didn't surrender to the Shadow Church today, none of them would be able to leave alive. Dini was one of the bishop priests in Talon City. Even she betrayed the faith of Lauvita. Could the Church of Torture really defeat the powerful Shadow Church that had the backing of Mordor City and the Outer Islands? "I'm willing to serve the great Shadow Lord." Crack. With the sound of a long whip falling to the ground, a beautiful dark-skinned woman put down her weapon. She was a half-blood drow. As a half-elf, it was easier for her to accept the faith of Soren than other gods because Soren was originally a half-elf clergy. Although his core clergy was Shadow, the half-elves were still under his protection. If Soren's church really expressed its willingness to accept them, then they should have a chance to integrate into it. As long as some things were started, the next step would be much easier. Whether they were willing or not, after seeing the corpses lying on the ground, these half-elf priests, who were mainly female, expressed that they could change their faith and serve Soren. Whether they were sincere or not, as long as people first began to surrender to Soren's church, then the situation would move in a direction that was more favorable to the Shadow Church. They were just a group of mortals. And this was a collision between the gods and the church. Although Lauvita had a lot of strength on the surface world, there were still some believers gathered in the Underdark. It was impossible to compete with the Shadow Church only by relying on the church in Talon City. "Your Excellency High Priest." After all the half-elf priests gave up resistance, Dini came to a prayer room at the back. She humbly bowed her head to the woman hiding in the shadows in front of her and carefully said, The half-elf priests in the temple area have basically surrendered. If you agree, I will try my best to persuade the other half-elf priests to give up resistance. The high priest figure came out. A faint smile appeared on her face as she slowly said, "My lord is merciful. As long as they are willing to surrender to my lord, then whether they are half-elves or not, they will be forgiven. Lavita's death is only a matter of time. She has lost her original intention of being a true god. She is addicted to the desire to abuse and be abused. Only by believing in my lord Soren can you be saved. The shadow will protect you." The operation to deal with Lauvita the whipping maiden was comprehensive. The assassination in the center was only the surface. The division and subjugation planned by the high priest was the key. As a psionic warlock with a profession level of 30 and above, she could easily find the flaws in the enemy's mind. And these half-elves who served Lauvita were just the beginning. Since he had decided to deal with Lauvita, Soren would not only kill her, but also swallow her whole church. Chapter 903. Inside the dazzling hall. A group of nobles in gorgeous clothes gathered here. The leader was a middle-aged man in his 30s or 40s, with a brown lion emblem on his chest. This was the family emblem of the nobles. The design avoided the symbol of the gods. Generally, this emblem could only be worn by nobles who had an epic character in their family. The middle-aged man in front of him was a member of the lion family. This was an ancient family that had ruled Talon City for more than 100 years. During the era of Queen Isabella, there was an epic character named Golden Lion. The birth of the lion family began at that time, but since then, there had never been an epic character in this family. At most, there would be one or two legendary professions. The lion family had declined for a period of time, but the bloodline of this family still had some advantages. Every few generations there would always be a few geniuses. And the current leader of the family was the standard genius in the eyes of mortals. At the age of 35 he had entered the realm of legends, the city lord of Talon City, Nox the Lion. Although his strength had entered the realm of legends, and he was already a powerful figure among mortals, at this moment, Nox's expression was quite hesitant and tangled. There were few aristocratic virtues left. This was a dark and foolish era. Everything that Sauron had seen and encountered in Amber City would also appear in Talon City, and it might even be worse than it was in Talon City. The glory of the lion family had been gone for a long time. Although there was a legendary character in these years, there was no doubt that the virtues of the Golden Lion had not been passed on to his descendants. Nox was a noble lord in the lawful evil camp. His cruel rule had always exploited and oppressed the civilians in Talon City. He let the Church of Torture grow stronger in exchange for some gifts from the gods. He even secretly executed several paladins who dared to meddle in other people's business and questioned his rule. If there was no outbreak of the Avatar crisis, with Nox's legendary strength, his rule in Talon City would continue for hundreds of years. However, the outbreak of the Avatar crisis shook his rule, and it also made him need more help from the Maiden of Pain. He thought that with the protection of a god, he would be able to survive this crisis safely. But never had he imagined that he would have an even more terrifying enemy because of this. Shadow Lord, Soren. The mysterious assassins had already turned Talon City upside down. These people were secretly supported by the Thieves' Guild. So far, they had not obtained many clues. City Lord. An old man with a plump face stood up and said, "Things can't get any worse. Now the entire Talon City was in chaos. We have to find a way to stop this. More than 10 nobles have been killed so far. Maybe we should take some revenge on the murderer." This is Sir Finley. He used to be a high-ranking knight, but now he had become a pot-bellied fatty. The fall of Talon City had caused the nobles to indulge in pleasure. More than half of the nobles present were overweight. Even Nox had become much fatter because of the luxurious indulgence. An idiot who doesn't know who the enemy is. Nox thought so in his heart, but he did not say it out loud. Instead, he slowly said, "The situation must be controlled. But more importantly, we must choose a side in this matter." There was no lack of smart people present. The nobles were all a little scheming. And they were proficient in politics, so they naturally knew what the city lord was talking about. "I think we should stand on the side of the goddess of torture. Her church has a closer relationship with us and Mordor City is far away. They may not win this battle." A nobleman who looked like he had drunk too much said. What he did not say was that the goddess of torture's church had a lot of information on him. If these things were announced, he would be hanged for what he had done. At this time, he had to stand on the side of the goddess of torture, and there was no other choice. I think the goddess of torture's chances of winning are very low. This time it was a young noble who spoke. He vaguely looked like a half-elf. There were many half-elves on the continent, and the number of hybrids was not small. In many cities that were ruled by evil, female elves were considered expensive private property. Under such circumstances, it was possible to give birth to a half-elf descendant. This noble was called Telano, and he was the illegitimate son of a half-elf. For an illegitimate son to inherit the title, he must be ruthless enough. Although the other nobles looked at him with a trace of contempt, no one refuted him. This meant that he had the power to deter others. However, although most of the nobles did not speak at this moment, a burly figure sitting on the side sneered, "Telano, you despicable patricide. Are you ready to bow to the enemy so soon?" Patricide. This was a message from Talon City. It was said that Telano inherited the title by poisoning his father with his own hands, but no one could prove this matter. It was only spread among the nobles as a message. Clang. Hearing these harsh words, Telano pulled out his long sword in an instant and said angrily, "Nordente, shut your stinking mouth, or you'll never be able to speak again." In an instant the atmosphere became tense. "Enough." As the city lord, Knox shouted and then said, "Today's meeting ends here. Nordente, you stay, the others go back first." In this case there was no room for discussion. The nobles of Talon City were not united enough. Knox felt that it was better to leave a close noble behind to discuss in secret. The half-elf illegitimate son named Telano glared at the burly man in the dark and left with his entourage. He had been adventuring on the continent in his early years and had a group of decent outlaws by his side. Even Knox didn't want to make things too awkward with him. The group of nobles retreated. However, some of them did not leave the city lord's mansion but went directly to the backyard. These were Knox's trusted aides. The Shadow Church came aggressively. Most of the nobles of Talon City had a close relationship with Lorita's church. At this time they were obviously more familiar with Lorita than the Shadow Church that they had never met. The night sky was dark. The nobles who stayed did not leave until very late because they could not think of a better solution. Knox rubbed his forehead tiredly. He felt that the situation was very tricky because as a secular noble, it was very uncomfortable to be involved in the struggle between two god churches. Not good. Not good. A panicked voice came. Knox stood up and said angrily, "Why are you panicking?" A man dressed as an official staggered in and then said in a panic, "City Lord." Not good. Telano rebelled. He has led people to attack the warehouse. He is now attacking the city defense. Many guards have been bribed by him to rebel. Rebel? In an instant Knox woke up with a start. Recalling Telano's resentful eyes when he left, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart and said in a deep voice, "How many people do they have? Immediately gather the other nobles and follow me." The man dressed as an official stammered, "Many. Many troops." Telano found many reinforcements from God knows where. These rebel troops are all flying a black flag. Ignoring the stammering official, Knox immediately rushed out with the others. As soon as they went out, they saw the flames in the distance. Many places in Talon City were on fire, and they could vaguely hear mournful cries. Further away there was the sound of troops gathering and some dull loud noises. They did not know what was going on. "City Lord, don't worry." The burly noble named Nordente frowned and looked at the flames, then said, "With Telano's strength, even if there are reinforcements, there can't be many of them. I think he is trying to confuse us. Let me bring people to catch him and bring him to you." Chapter 904. The entire Talon City fell into chaos. Ordinary people locked their doors and windows and looked at the army gathering outside in horror. Fortunately, Trano's men were disciplined, and no one took the opportunity to rob civilians. Rumble. The dull sound of artillery fire came, and this loud noise made Knox's heart skip a beat. He said angrily, "Why is there the sound of artillery? Did Trano capture the armory as well?" "No." A man stammered. He should have found a way to get it from outside. The guards from the city lord quickly gathered, and then they encountered Trano's men on the street. Knox couldn't help but curl his lips because the army in front of him was obviously a motley crew of adventurers and mercenaries. Compared to the personal guards of the lion family, these people were obviously not enough. The fact was as he guessed. These Tranos men were almost defeated at the first touch. They could only fight with the corrupt city guards, but they were no match for the private guards of the nobles. But, just when Nox thought he could quell the rebellion quickly, an army with a black flag appeared in front of him. At the moment when he saw this army, Nox's heart couldn't help but sink. He had been on the battlefield. He had seen a real army, and the team that was advancing silently in front of him was undoubtedly that kind of real army. Black flag. The flag of Mordor City. As if thinking of something, Nox's expression suddenly became very scary. Reality soon gave him a response. Because at this moment in Mordor City, in the laboratory near the arcane tower, a cold mechanical voice had just sounded, Space Waymark Lock. Target Talon City. Open the number 1 temporary portal. Release the steel golems. Space Waymark Lock. Target Talon City. Open the number 2 temporary portal. Release the 3rd guard of Mordor City. Several mechanical voices sounded in succession. With a white teleportation aura, an army suddenly appeared in Talon City thousands of miles away. At this moment, 5 heavy steel golems appeared in front of Nox. Damn it. Nox felt that the situation was out of his control, but he had no other choice. He roared, drew his weapon and rushed toward the army in front of him. Now he only hoped that the goddess of abuse, Lorita, could appear as soon as possible because the decayed guards of Talon City could not stop the attack of the elites of Mordor City. First Street has been conquered. The south gate of Talon City has been occupied. The central square has been occupied. The 3rd squad is attacking the Ordnance Division. The 5th guard is attacking the City Lord's mansion. The continuous mechanical sound echoed, and the army of Mordor City was like a sophisticated instrument, easily destroying the defense line of Talon City, and then steadily advancing, gradually encroaching on the enemy's territory. At this moment, Soren was also quietly observing everything. This was the first time that Mordor City had used the portal for a long-range siege. Although they had secretly provoked a rebellion of a noble, when it came to actual command, many elements were still far beyond the military standards of this era. Fortunately, under the command of Thaling, the army of Mordor City had been steadily advancing. Defeat the city guards. Taking over the defense. The captives have all been escorted. The 3rd Street has been strongly resisted. A large number of enemy knights have appeared, requesting support from the rear. As a big city, Talon City naturally had a group of old noble forces. Their family had trained many knights, which was the biggest problem for Soren to take over Talon City. He thought for a moment and said, Release the diamond golems. Giants will lead my guards to join the battlefield. The plan would always change. At first, Soren wanted to kill Lorita, but then he found that the Church of the Goddess of Torture seemed to be able to take over Talon City. Then he found that Talon City seemed to be decaying. As long as he sent a regular army, it was possible to take down the city. In the end, everything happened in front of him. Because of the stubbornness of the nobles of Talon City, Soren's plan to deal with the nobles of Talon City directly turned into a plan to wipe them out. The giants, who had been waiting for a long time, were already hungry and thirsty. After the portal opened, they immediately led the guards into it. Whoosh! Muffled footsteps sounded, followed by the screams of the guards who were sent flying. Nox raised his head and found that a burly giant had appeared in front of him. The Mud Giant. When he was young, he had adventured on the road, so he knew very well how terrifying the power of such a creature with such an amazing physique could be. The giant also noticed Nox. He was not very smart, but he was not stupid. He immediately recognized that the nobles in front of him were different. They seemed to be from the ruling class of Talon City. Thus, he smirked and swung the heavy anchor at Nox. The terrifying power set off a gust of wind, and Nox did not dare to face it head-on. He dodged awkwardly. Behind him, a thick wall collapsed under the giant's attack. Monster. Nox was nervous. Only a non-human creature could unleash such a terrifying power. Even a legendary warrior would not be able to resist it. The giant's attack seemed slow, but the heavy and huge anchor made up for many problems. Nox found that the enemy's attack range was too wide. Although he could seize the opportunity to sneak attack, it also meant that the enemy's next attack would leave him with no way to escape. Nox did not know if he was strong enough to withstand the giant's terrifying power. He wanted to retreat. As the Lord of Talon City, his life was very valuable. So many years of comfortable life had already worn away his ambition. He did not want to risk his life to fight a worthless giant. However, at this moment a cold voice sounded, "Giant, why are you dawdling for so long? We must take Talon City in 3 hours. Don't waste time." Ugly Monkey's figure appeared from the shadows, and then another soft female voice sounded. She said in surprise, "He is the Lord of Talon City, Nox. Once we kill him, Talon City will be ours." The priestess of the Church of Torment appeared behind them. Ugly Monkey's eyes lit up when he heard this. He instantly pulled out his dagger and rushed forward, murmuring, "The Lord of Talon City? Looks like an opponent worth fighting." Panting. Heavy panting. Nox felt that his physical strength was about to be exhausted. As a legendary warrior, although he had great strength, more than 10 years of comfortable aristocratic life had made him unable to break through for a long time. His legs were stabbed 3 times, and 2 of his ribs were broken by the huge force in his chest. He knew that he was about to die. The battle in Talon City was about to stop. He could still stand now because of the pride of the Lion family and the legendary profession. Seeing Trano's figure in front of him, Nox's eyes suddenly turned red, and he said angrily, "You shameless traitor." "Traitor?" Trano smiled, then bowed respectfully to a woman in the shadows and said, "This is called adapting to circumstances. What does Lauvita have that is worth us fighting for her? Don't think that I don't know why you don't want to surrender. I know all about the despicable things you did with the Church of Torment." TSK. Trano walked over slowly with a hint of madness on his face. "Don't think that you can control Talon City by killing me. You are just a puppet of Mordor City." Nox said angrily. Trano didn't care about it at all and said slowly, "So what? At least I control Talon City in name and I have more power and wealth. Mortals should know how to be content." Mordor City was far away. Even if he controlled Talon City secretly, there must be a puppet standing on the surface. This puppet didn't need to be a puppet because Soren didn't have so much energy to manage Talon City. Trano could enter Soren's sight because he was a half-elf, and because he was a ruthless guy who could help Soren deal with a lot of shady things. Soren didn't care about the constraints of morality. As a god of the evil alignment, he only cared about the benefits that he could obtain. Boom. A loud noise came from the distance, and it came from the temple area. This time the chaos didn't affect the temples of other gods. The only one that was attacked was Lauvita's temple. At this moment, a dazzling light appeared on Lauvita's temple. The figure of a goddess could be vaguely seen. Nox suddenly laughed and said crazily, "Lauvita has arrived. You guys are all going to die." "Is that so?" Trano smiled. Then he slowly said, "My lord has been waiting for him for a long time." "My lord?" Trano already believed in the half-elf god. Almost at the same time, just as the dazzling light appeared above Lauvita's temple, a golden figure also appeared above the great temple of Mordor City. Then Soren, who was in the form of a saint, appeared above Talon City. "I finally forced you out." He stared coldly at Lauvita in front of him. She was a beautiful woman with a cold face, holding a 9-tailed whip in her hand. At this moment she was facing Soren's gaze. She had no choice because if she didn't appear, Lauvita's faith in the surface world would collapse, and the church was so badly damaged that the gods didn't dare to come out to fight. The faith in the Underdark would be easily taken away by other gods. The Queen of Spiders had been waiting for this for a long time. If Lauvita didn't even have the courage to fight Soren, then Lolth would be very willing to completely erase her influence in the Underdark. At that time, perhaps Lauvita could only wait for her death. P.S. I owe a lot of manuscripts, but fortunately I've already paid them back. Chapter 905. The Avatar Crisis did not require mercy. When Lauvita's figure appeared, Soren immediately transformed into his saint form and greeted her. This time the battle was completely different from the past. The moment the two sides clashed, there was almost no close-range combat. The reason was simple. The Avatar Crisis had been going on for some time. Soren had accumulated a lot of divine power, and Lauvita had also accumulated a lot of divine power. As long as the divine power was not depleted, the divine shield of a god could resist almost any magic damage and physical damage. For gods like the Queen of Spiders, even the super arcane crystal pulse cannon could be resisted by the divine shield. Soren did not encounter an enemy with enough divine power when he killed Malor, the god of the hunt and the Lord of Shadows, but when he fought against Lauvita, he encountered an enemy who had at least 30% of her divine power. Rumble. A dazzling golden light erupted over Talon City. This was a battle that was very close to the true god form. Lauvita cast at least 3 level 9 divine spells in a row the moment Soren appeared, and Soren also used his divine power to offset the opponent's attack. Under their feet was the temple district of Talon City. It was just the beginning of the battle, but the aftermath of the divine power had already destroyed the land. The only thing that was intact were the temples that were shrouded in light. A little civilian casualties were inevitable, but at this time no one cared about it. When the Avatar crisis broke out, mortals were like ants. In the past 2 years, almost hundreds of millions of innocent creatures died tragically. Soren had long been mentally prepared for some things. The battle of divine power continued. Soren's divine power was not far from Lauvita's, which meant that after both sides exhausted their divine power, they would not be able to cast divine spells in their saint form. Next, it was time to test their true strength. The strength of a god was not only determined by their own divinity level and divine power, but also the most basic profession level and comprehensive strength. During the Avatar crisis, no god could squander their divine power points without limit. After fighting against more than 10 level 9 divine spells, their divine power points were running low. Soren stopped casting divine spells, while Lauvita activated her divine shield. They could only use the remaining divine power points to defend themselves. Any extravagant actions could cause both sides to be unable to defend against a single fatal attack. At this moment, Soren finally saw Lauvita's appearance. A very beautiful and cold young woman. This should be Lauvita's original form, a cruel and merciless beautiful woman. She was like a flower with poisonous thorns, not minding taking the lives of others. Shadow Lord Soren. Lauvita's voice was unusually calm as she said calmly, "I don't have any grudges with you. I don't understand why you're targeting me." Soren looked at him quietly and said slowly, "Is that so? In this calamity we have no choice. You are blocking my path forward. That's all." Lauvita fell into silence. In fact, her question just now had no meaning, because an evil god almost didn't need any legitimate reason to deal with someone as long as there were enough benefits. She was like this. Soren was like this too. Almost all evil gods were like this. Lauvita didn't speak again, but waved her 9-tailed whip and rushed up in an instant. She was not a spellcaster. Lauvita, who was in charge of pain and torture, was a very good fighting god, so even if she faced Soren head-on, she didn't feel afraid. Shadow Realm. Tracking Realm. Crafty Realm. The power of realms was spread out, and the role of the gods' accumulation of priesthoods and realms was reflected in this level of battle. The more powerful the realms and priesthoods that any god had, the more obvious the advantage in this kind of battle. Soren's priesthoods and realms instantly suppressed Lauvita's power, directly forming a suppression on immunity. Epic divine power. Soren's figure was accompanied by a silver-white stream of light, and he could sneak around freely within the range of the Shadow Realm. Lauvita's priesthood strengthened the pain that Soren suffered, but it was nothing to his will. With the power of an intermediate god against a lesser god, it was already suppressing. As long as the battle continued like this, Soren's victory was only a matter of time. However, any victory would not come so easily. Just when Soren was suppressing Lauvita to the point where she could not raise her head, a rotten smell suddenly filled the night, and then the army from Mordor City had a dark face. Some people with weaker physiques almost died instantly. Be careful. These gases are poisonous. Priest. Hurry up and disperse these poisonous gases. Everyone gather around the priest. Panicked voices sounded. These highly poisonous gases appeared in Talon City without anyone knowing. Not only the army of Mordor City, but also many residents died from the poison. It was a bit like the Cloud of Death, which had a fatal effect on low-level creatures, but the range was many times larger than that of the Cloud of Death. Ah. Soren, the Lord of Shadows. Do you think I will deal with you alone? My reinforcements are here. Lauvita suddenly teleported away, and a smile appeared on her face. In just a short time, hundreds of people died in the army of Mordor City, almost all of them died from the poisonous gases. At the same time, some figures of Droll appeared in Talon City. The Witherers. The Droll represented the fall and corruption, the evil believers who served the Lady of Poison. These Witherers summoned rotten vines and plants, and appeared in the dark to attack the army of Mordor City. There were also traces of lizard men. The Lady of Poison, Talona? Soren's figure stopped in midair. He looked into the darkness, where there was a rotten and gloomy divine breath. He said with a blank expression, "It seems that I guessed right. But do you think you can defeat me like this?" The Lady of Poison, the Lady of Disease, the Mother of all Plagues, Talona had many titles that made mortals afraid. She was often described as a haggard old woman with various religious tattoos on her face. Wherever she went, misfortune and suffering would inevitably follow. Her heart was like that of a headstrong and greedy child, but trapped in a shell that had once been beautiful but was now ravaged by disease and age. A poor god who had been corrupted by her clergy. This was why Soren had always paid attention to his own will. Talona was a typical god who had been controlled by her clergy. Even her body had been corrupted by the clergy of poison and disease. Talona used to serve the god of slaughter, Baal, together with Lauvita. Soren's calmness made Lauvita feel a little uneasy. Two weak gods could kill Soren, but Soren's calmness at this moment meant that he didn't care. A gust of cold wind appeared. Without any warning, the temperature of the entire Talon city began to drop gradually. It was already the 4th or 5th month of the year, but Talon city, which was located in the south, seemed to have entered the cold winter season all of a sudden. A gust of wind with snow and ice raged, blowing away all the poison and gas. Amidst the dancing snow and ice, the figure of the Princess Royal slowly appeared in Talon city. She had been here for a long time. It was just that Soren didn't signal her to do it, so Princess Royal didn't show up. When the plot of the Lady of Poison emerged, the time for Princess Royal to show up had also arrived. The cold wind blew away the haze of death, and the ice and snow turned the witherers into crystal ice sculptures. Arendelle's Queen of Ice. Lauvita's face suddenly changed. The goddess of torture paid a big price to persuade Talona to help her, but the appearance of Princess Royal directly destroyed her plot because she was a mortal comparable to a god. Arendelle's Queen of Ice, a mortal who inherited the power of the goddess of the north wind and snow. Almost all gods knew that she was a very difficult enemy to deal with. 2 against 2. In this case her chances of winning were not very high. Soren's expression was very calm. It was not the first time he killed a god, and he knew very well that he couldn't make any mistakes when dealing with any god. It was best to go all out. "It seems that you don't have a backup plan." Soren looked at Lauvita in front of him and said slowly, "Then it's my turn." Dimensional lock. A force sealed the surrounding space and at the same time, accompanied by the light of teleportation, Gloria, Fallen Witch, Vivian, and the High Priest all appeared in the sky above Talon City. This was an important actual combat, and blindly protecting them was not enough. Soren also wanted to let them try to deal with a god-level enemy, so that they could understand how powerful a true god was. A huge portal appeared. With a strange silver-white halo, the whole Talon City was shrouded in the magic lock of the Arcane Tower. This was the second generation of Magic Lock, which integrated the characteristics of the astral sand into the magic lock. A dark and broken warship appeared under the night sky. The ghost ship, Deadman's Voice, appeared silently and immediately headed towards the believers of the goddess of poison. The corrupted witherers continued to bombard them, but there were still a lot of enemies. The believers of the goddess of poison greatly made up for the enemy's strength. However, the balance of the battle was still tilting towards Soren's side, because with the magic lock of the Arcane Tower covering the whole Talon City, the power of the field had been added to the army of Motor City. The magic lock's protective field. This was Soren's trump card to deal with the Blood War Legion, and today was the first large-scale practical test of the magic lock's field. Chapter 906. The goddess of poison and the goddess of torture once served the god of slaughter, Baal. Soren knew from the beginning that dealing with Laurita would not be as simple as dealing with the god of the hunt, Malor. It might even be more troublesome than dealing with the god of shadows. Because according to Soren's worst-case scenario, when dealing with the goddess of torture, Laurita, it was possible that the Lady of Night, Shar, would come out. Laurita once served the Lady of Night, but with the resurrection of the god of tyranny, Ban, she returned to the command of the three gods of death and became Ban's subordinate. Later, Ban died under the conspiracy of Cyric. The goddess of torture once followed the Dread Lord, but later she wavered between the Dread Lord and the Lady of Night. The battle on the ground became more and more intense. It could be seen that this time Laurita, the goddess of torture, was desperate because the army of Mordor had encountered the Drows from the Underdark, which meant that Laurita had even sent out the believers of the Underdark. The goddess of poison did not put in all her power, but there were also a lot of witherers and fallen droll in Talon City. They were good at using disease spells, and almost all the weapons of the believers were smeared with poison, which put a lot of pressure on the army of Mordor, especially the priests who could only cast healing and detoxification spells with all their strength. "Leave this to me." Gloria's figure floated in the air, and 72 tarot cards kept flying around her. As a legendary witch with the full support of Mordor, her equipment and strength were even stronger than high-grade legendary wizards. At this moment, Gloria was the main force against the Witherers, and the Fallen which was casting slightly forbidden spells to eliminate the droll who served the Lady of Poison. Because the goddess of poison was in charge of poisons, she also had a group of assassin followers under her command. The rogues from Sauron were fighting with the other side, but at the moment they did not have much of an advantage. The rogues who believed in Sauron had more powerful shadow abilities and stealth abilities, and almost all the assassins who served the Lady of Poison were good at using deadly poison. In contrast, at this moment the casualties in Mordor City were greater. The scope of the battle between the gods was very large, and there were not many intact parts of the temple area. Princess Royal was fighting against Lady of Poison at first, but after a few minutes she appeared beside Soren and said, "Change. Leave this to me." Soren didn't know why at first, but when he saw that Princess Royal's face was a little pale, he didn't think too much about it. He immediately changed his target to the Lady of Poison and handed the Goddess of Torture, Lorita, to Princess Royal. The Lady of Poison was a deity with an ugly and ferocious appearance because her divine title had corrupted her body. After approaching the Lady of Poison, Soren knew why Princess Royal wanted to change her opponent. A malicious and decaying domain power enveloped him. As Soren approached the Lady of Venom, a row of data popped up in front of his eyes. Affected by poison domain. Triggered a mandatory immunity test. Constitution immunity test passed. Will immunity test passed. Within the range of the poison domain, you will receive 3 poison corrosion damage per second. Affected by disease domain. Activated a mandatory immunity test. Constitution immunity test passed. Will immunity test passed. Within the range of the disease domain, you will receive 3 poison corrosion damage per second. Soren almost passed all the mandatory immunity tests. But the problem was that even so, after he got close enough to the Lady of Poison, he would constantly receive damage from the other party's divine title domain. It was almost ignored and immune to nearly 6 negative damage per second. No wonder almost no adventurers wanted to kill her during the Avatar crisis. And this was because Soren passed the other party's immunity test. If he didn't pass, the damage of the divine title domain that the Lady of Poison could create would be even more amazing. There was no doubt about it. Princess Royal's immunity was not very high. As a female spellcaster, Princess Royal's immunity tests were much worse than Soren's. This was also the reason why she asked for a change of opponent. As a warlock with relatively low HP, if this battle dragged on for too long, she might be killed by the Lady of Poison. But for Soren it was much easier because not only was his resistance high enough, but he also had a very strong burst ability. The Lady of Poison's domain was not very difficult for him to deal with. Talona's once beautiful body had been corrupted by her divine title. Her face looked like it was infected with leprosy, and there were strange abscesses and swollen lumps on her body. This was rarely seen on other gods, and the meaning it represented was naturally extraordinary. First of all, Talona could not control her divine title at all. The power of these 2 divine titles had suppressed her body, turning a god's body into this appearance. Secondly, the divine domain of poison and disease was much stronger than what they had shown. It was definitely not just a divine domain of lesser divine powers. It might even be a divine domain of intermediate divine powers or greater divine powers. It was precisely because of this that Talona's body was corroded by the divine domain. The divine title of poison was a little better. But according to Soren's judgment, the divine title of disease should not be a low-level divine title, it was very likely to be a mid-level divine title or above. This was because diseases contain too many things. There was once a mid-level divine title or above that of the goddess of pestilence. In order to replenish her divine power, Talona had once released a plague. This allowed her to gain more hatred from the goddess of agriculture, but it also allowed her to recover a lot of power. Facing Soren in front of her, the Lady of Poison was not afraid because in her view, Soren would never be able to get rid of the brand of a new god. Even if the divine title was lower than Soren's, Talona believed that she had a high chance of winning. But after the first tentative fight, the ferocious lady of poison in front of him suddenly opened her mouth and spat out a strange insect. The ground under her feet was quickly contaminated and turned into a land full of poison. All the plants around her quickly withered and died. This was the power of her divine title. The diseases that Talona was in charge of not only included intelligent life, but also all animals and plants. It was because of this that the goddess of earth and the goddess of agriculture hated her very much. The dark green poison quickly spread. Even the stones under her feet were quickly corroded, and the strange insects spat out by the Lady of Poison turned into a black cloud and quickly rushed toward Soren, completely enveloping him from all directions. An inexplicable sense of crisis. Soren felt a strong sense of danger from these strange insects, and his divine sixth sense made him realize that these insects could even kill him. Chapter 907. The sixth sense was a very powerful ability. It could give the user an amazing intuition of danger, and when the crisis of death was approaching, the user would also have a strong sense of danger. Poisonous insects were everywhere. They didn't know what kind of strange things they were, but they seemed to be a kind of magical creature. Spells and flames couldn't kill them all at once. The sense of crisis was getting closer and closer because these insects were too small and there were too many of them. Soren had no place to dodge at all. Brother, be careful. There was only one person on the battlefield who had a strong sixth sense, and that was Vivian. The little girl was keenly aware of the danger and directly teleported closer and cast a legendary spell. Time stop. The flying insects suddenly stopped in midair. Although they were magical creatures of the gods, there was no way for them to be immune to the effect of time stop. Good chance. Soren realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Vivian's temporary help gave Soren a chance to attack. The goddess of poison, Talona, was a god who did not use weapons. Her full name was the goddess of poison and disease. Her weapon was the rough hand, which was the legendary barehanded attack. Because she was in charge of diseases and poisons, Talona's hands could automatically trigger various diseases and toxins when they came into contact with the enemy. This ability was very fatal to mortals. With the power of her realm, even thousands of professions could not necessarily kill her. However, for Soren, who had amazing resistance, once he closed the distance and attacked Talona with her bare hands, she would be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Shadow Strike. Simulacrum. Soren's sudden attack seemed to be a signal. In an instant, the situation of the whole battlefield was reversed. His figure split into two when he jumped. Two Saurons that looked exactly the same appeared in front of the goddess of poison. They attacked from the left and right respectively, brandishing their silver-white scimitars. At the same time, the power of the Shadow Realm covered the area, the breath of death spread, and the power of slaughter temporarily suppressed the poison realm. Soren was ready to rush to the opponent's side for close combat. On the other side of the battlefield, the blighters who served the goddess of poison and the followers of the goddess of torment both suffered a devastating blow. This was because when Soren cast the mimicry spell, Gloria also split into two under the night sky, and the spell bombarded the blighters like cannon fire. But this was only the beginning. Fallen Witch Kalina, who was obviously absent-minded and seemed to be slacking, also became serious. She also cast Simulacrum. The two black-robed Fallen Witch acted separately, and countless spells fell like a torrent. The easiest one was probably Vivian. The little girl's magic attack was already overwhelming, and because Lillian was in her body, she was even more effective than Soren when she cast Simulacrum. She was the only one who could fully display the power of Simulacrum among everyone present. Two figures of Vivian appeared on the battlefield. The original was controlled by Vivian herself, while the avatar was controlled by Lillian's consciousness. The first round of attacks was thousands of arcane missiles. The arcane missiles formed a torrent, and completely enveloped the followers of the goddess of torment. At this moment, the whole battlefield changed and even Princess Royal was slightly surprised. She opened her mouth and murmured, "What kind of spell is this?" Simulacrum. One of the core spells that was lost during the Arcane Empire. Splat. Rotten and poisonous blood splattered. Soren brandished his scimitar and sliced off the rotten flesh on his arm. Then he converted his divine power and cast restoration on himself. In front of him was the goddess of poison, Talona, who was covered in wounds. Many of the pustules on her body had ruptured, and the blood of the deity had been corrupted by her divine domain, turning into a horribly corrosive liquid. Everything that came into contact with her blood would be stained with poison and decay. The outcome of the battle was obvious. Soren disappeared on the spot and appeared behind the goddess of poison. Along with a strange silver-whitish stream of light, he swung his scimitar and decapitated her. The headless corpse fell to the ground. Along with Talona's death, a dazzling divine radiance spread. A large part of it poured into Soren's body, while the rest spread to the others on the battlefield. A divine radiance entered Gloria's body. A divine radiance entered Vivian's body. A divine radiance entered Princess Royal's body. What surprised Soren was that at the moment of the goddess of poison's death, a divine radiance that represented the power of her divine domain flew directly to the nearby fallen witch. Then, the fallen witch's body trembled as the radiance merged with her body. There were more than 10 divine radiances scattered when the goddess of poison died. Apart from the majority that Soren obtained, even the ugly monkey obtained 1 divine radiance during the battle. At the same time, among the withered in the enemy camp, there were also some who obtained the power of the goddess of poison. A row of data appeared in front of his eyes. You have killed the goddess of poison, Talona. Extracting target's soul energy. You have received 63 million slaughter EXP. Target possesses divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You have received 45 divine radiance. Target possesses divine radiance. Extracting target's divine radiance. You have received 25 divine radiance. Divine domain conflict. You are unable to master the disease, divine domain. You have received partial information about the disease, divine domain. You have mastered the disease, divine domain. Would you like to convert the disease, divine domain into the death, divine domain? Divine domain conflict. You are unable to master the poison, divine domain. You have received partial information about the poison, divine domain. You have mastered the poison, divine domain. Would you like to integrate the poison, divine domain into the rogue, divine domain? There were no surprises. Soren was not very compatible with the divine domain of the goddess of poison, Talona. The only thing that could be connected was that diseases brought death and rogues were good at poison. These 2 divine domains were not compatible with Soren's divine domain, so he could only master 1 step backward. This was also why Talona's power was scattered to many people. P.S. There is another update today. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.